Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbitt. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alexandria Adair. Camarillo, California, April 2026. Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbitt. The Arsenicators, a Tale of Crime. It was Mrs. Beale who put it into our heads that Miss Sandal lived plain because she was poor. We knew she thought high, because that is what you jolly well have to do if you are a vegetationist and an all-wooler and those sorts of things. And we tried to get money for her, like we had once tried to do for ourselves, and we succeeded by means that have been told in another place in getting 2 golden pounds. Then, of course, we began to wonder what we had better do with the 2 pounds now we had got them.
"Put them in the savings bank," Dora said.
Alice said,
"Why, when we could have them to look at."
Noel thought we ought to buy her something beautiful to adorn Miss Sandal's bare dwelling. H.O. thought we might spend it on nice tinned and potted things from the stores to make the plain living and high thinking go down better. But Oswald knew that, however nice the presents are that other people buy for you, it is really more satisfying to have the chink to spend exactly as you like. Then Dickie said, "I don't believe in letting money lie idle. Father always says it's a bad business."
"They give interest at the bank, don't they?"
Dora said. "Yes, 2 a year or some rot like that. We ought to go into trade with it and try to make more of it, is what we ought to do."
"If it's Miss Sandal's money, do you think we ought to do anything with it without asking her?"
"It isn't hers till she's got it, and it is hers because it's not ours to spend. I think we're, in loco parentis to that 2 quid, because anyone could see poor Miss Sandal doesn't know how to manage her money, and it will be much better if we give her 10 pounds than just 2. This is how Dickie argued. We were sitting on the sands when this council took place, and Alice said,
"Suppose we bought a shrimping net and sold shrimps from our window in red handkerchiefs and white French caps."
Well, we asked her how she would like going to the sea nearly up to her neck in all weathers, and she had to own she had not thought of that. Besides, shrimps are so beastly cheap, more than you can eat for 2 pence. The conversation was not interesting to anyone but Dickie, because we did not then believe we could do it, though later we thought differently. But I dare say we should have gone on with it just out of politeness to him, only at this moment we saw a coast guard, who is a great friend of ours, waving to us from the seawall. So we went up, and he said, "You take my tip and come along home. There's something come for you."
"Perhaps it's heaps of things, like I said, to eat with the plain living,"
said H.O. And bright visions of hampers full of the most superior tuck winged our young legs as we cut along home. It was not, however, a hamper that we found awaiting us. It was a large box, and beside that there were 2 cases addressed to Dickie and me, and through the gaps in the boards we could see twisted straw, and our hearts leaped high in our breasts, because we knew that they were bikes. And such indeed they proved to be, free wheels of the most unspotted character, the noble gift of our Indian uncle, ever amiable, generous, and esteemed. While we were getting the glorious bikes from their prison bars, the others were undoing the box which had their names on it. It contained cakes and sweets, a work basket for Dora, lined with red satin, and dressed up with silver thimbles, and all sorts of bodkins and scissors, and knives with silver handles. There was a lovely box of paints for Alice. Noel had a paint box too, and H.O. had a very good Aunt Sally. And there were lots of books, not the sawdusty, dry kind that Miss Sandal had in her house, but jolly good books, the kind you can't put down till you've finished. But just now we hardly looked at them, for who with a spark of manly spirit would think twice about a book with a new freewheel champing the oil like a charger in a ballad? Dickie and I had a 3-mile spin before dinner, and only fell off 5 times between us. 3 spills were Dickie's. 1 was Oswald's, and 1 was when we ran into each other. The bikes were totally uninjured. As time ran its appointed course, we got a bit used to the bikes, and finding that you cannot ride all day and all night, we began to look at the books. Only one of them comes into the story. It was called The Youth's Manual of Scientific and Mechanical Recreation, and of course, we none of us read it till we read everything else, and then we found it wasn't half bad. It taught you how to make all sorts of things, galvanic batteries and kites and mousetraps, and how to electroplate things, and how to do wood carving and leatherwork. We tried as many of the things as we had money for, and some of them succeeded, and then we made a fire balloon. It took a long time to make, and then it caught fire and blazed away before we could get it launched. So we made another, and Noel dropped it near the water butt where there was a puddle, and being tissue paper, it was unable to stand the strain. So we made another, but the paste was bad and it did not stick. So we made another. Then at last, when all was ready, Oswald climbed onto the pigsty at Mrs. Beale's and held the balloon very steady, while Dicky lighted the cotton wool, soaked in spirits of wine, which hangs from the end, where cars are in larger sizes, and causes it to be called a fire balloon. A taper is burned inside the balloon, and then, according to the book, it readily ascends and is carried away by the wind, sometimes to a considerable distance. Well, this time everything happened just as the book said, which is not always the case. It was a clear, dark night, bright stars only, and, to our relief and agreeable surprise, our balloon rose up and sailed away, dragging its lighted tail like a homemade comet. It sailed away over the marshes, getting smaller and smaller, and at last it was, though lost to sight, to memory dear. Some of us thought it wasn't worth doing, but Oswald was glad he had persevered. He does hate to be beaten. However, we none of us cared to make another, so we went to bed. Dicky always goes to sleep directly on these occasions, but Oswald, more thoughtful for his years, sometimes reviews the events of the day. He must have been nearly asleep, because he was just reviewing an elephant that flew with a lamp inside so that it looked like a fire balloon, when Alice suddenly came and woke him up completely. "Beware," she said in tones of awe. And he said, but not crossly, "Well, what on earth's up now?" "The fire balloon," replied Alice. "What about it?" he rejoined, still calm and kind, though roused from his reviews. "Why, it came to me all in a minute. Oh, Oswald, when it comes down, there are lots of farms in the march. Suppose it comes down and sets light to something. It's a crime, arsenic or something, and you can be hanged for it." "Don't be an idiot," said Oswald kindly. "The book wouldn't have told youths how to make them if they were crimes. Go back to bed, for goodness sake." "I wish we hadn't. Oh, I do," said Alice. But she did as she was told. Oswald has taught her this. Next day her fears had stopped, like silent watches in the night, and we began to make a trap for badgers, in case we ever found one. But Dicky went to the top of the mill with some field glasses he had borrowed from Mr. Carrington to look at distant ships with, and he burst into the busy circle of badger trap makers and said, "I say, come and look, there's a fire in the marsh." "There," said Alice, dropping the wire pliers on her good elder brother's foot. "What did I tell you?" We all tore to the top of the mill, and sure enough, far across the sunny green marshes rose a little cloud of smoke, and blue and yellow flames leaped out every now and then. We all took turns to look through the glasses. Then Oswald said, "This is no time for looking through field glasses with your mouths open. We must go and help. We must fetch the fire engines or something. The bike's Dicky." Almost instantly we were in the saddle and tearing along the level marsh towards the direction of the fire. At first we got down at every crossroad and used the field glasses to see which way to go, but as we got nearer, or the fire got bigger, or perhaps both, we could see it quite plainly with the naked eye. It was much further off than we had thought, but we rode on, undaunted, regardless of fatigue, and dinner time being now long gone by. We got to the fire at last. It was at Crown Avender Farm, and we had to lift the bikes over fences and wheel them over plowed fields to get there, because we did not know the right way by road. Crown Avender is a little farmhouse and a barn opposite, and a great rickyard, and 2 of the ricks were alight. They smoked horribly, and the wind blew the hot smoke into your eyes, and every now and then you saw great flames, yards long they seemed, leap out as if they were crying to get to the house. We had put our bikes in a ditch a field away, and now we went all around about to ask if we could help, but there wasn't a soul to be seen. We did not know what to do. Even Oswald, always full of resource, almost scratched his head, which seems to help people think, though I don't think it ever would be, besides not looking nice. "I wish we'd told him in the village," said Dicky. We had not done this, and the reason, the author is ashamed to say, was because we wanted to get there before anyone else. This was very selfish, and the author has often regretted it. The flames were growing larger and fiercer, and the tar on the side of the barn next the rickyard was melting and running down like treacle. "There's a well," said Dicky suddenly. "It isn't a deep well, and there are 2 buckets." Oswald understood. He drew up the water, and Dicky took the buckets as they came up full and dripping and dashed the water onto the tarry face of the barn. It hissed and steamed. We think it did some good. We took it in turns to turn the wheel well. It was hard work, and it was frightfully hot. Then we heard a horrid sound, a sort of out-of-breath scream, and there was a woman, very red in the face and perspiring, climbing over the fence. "Hallo!" said Oswald.
"Oh!"
the woman said, panting.
"It's not the house, then? Thank them as be it's not the house. Oh, my heart alive, I thought it was the house."
"It isn't the house," said Oswald, "but it jolly soon will be."
"Oh, my poor Lily," said the woman. "With this here wind, the house will be alight in a minute, and her a bed in there. Where's Honeysit?"
"There's no one here but us. The house is locked up," we said.
"Yes, I know, 'cause of tramps. Honeysit's got the key. I comes in as soon as I cleared dinner away. She's ill abed, sleeping like a lamb. I'll be bound to all a knowing of her burning end."
"We must get her out," said Oswald. But the woman didn't seem to know what to do. She kept on saying, "Where's Honeysett? Oh, drat him! Where's that Honeysett?" So then Oswald felt it was time to be a general, like he always meant to if he got the chance. He said, "Come on!" And he took a stone and broke the kitchen window and put his hand through the jagged hole and unfastened the catch and climbed in. The back door was locked and the key gone, but the front door was only bolted inside, but it stuck very tight from having been painted and shut before the paint was dry and never opened again. Oswald couldn't open it. He ran back to the kitchen window and shouted to the others, "Go round to the other door and shove for all you're worth," he cried in the manly tones that all must obey. So they went, but Dicky told me afterwards the woman didn't shove for anything like all she was worth. In fact, she wouldn't shove at all till he had to make a sort of battering ram of her, and then she seemed to awake from a dream and they got the door open. We followed the woman up the stairs and into a bedroom, and there was another woman sitting up in bed trembling and her mouth opening and shutting. "Oh, it's you, Eliza," she said, falling back against the pillows. "I thought it were tramps." Eliza did not break things to the sufferer gently, like we should have done, however hurried. "Mercy, you aren't burnt alive in your bed, Lily," she merely remarked. "The place is all ablaze." Then she rolled her sick sufferer in a blanket and took hold of her shoulders and told us to take her feet. But Oswald was too calm to do this suddenly. He said, "Where are you going to put her?" "Anywheres," said Eliza wildly. "Anywheres is better than here." "There's plenty of time," said Oswald, and he and Dicky rushed into another room and got a feather bed and bedclothes and hunched them down the stairs and dragged them half a field away and made a bed in a nice dry ditch, and then we consented to carry the unfortunate bedwoman to it. The house was full of smoke by this time, though it hadn't yet caught on fire, and I tell you, we felt just like heroic firemen as we stumbled down the crookedy narrow stairs, back first, bearing the feet of the sick woman. Oswald did so wish he had had a fireman's helmet to put on. When we got the fading Lily to her dry ditch, she clutched Oswald's arm and whispered, "Save the sticks." "What sticks?" asked Oswald, who thought it was the ragings of delirium. "She means the furniture," said Eliza, "but I'm afraid its doom is written on high." "Rubbish," said Oswald kindly, and we flew back, us boys dragging Eliza with us. There didn't seem to be much furniture in the house, but when we began to move it, it at once seemed to multiply itself with the rapidity of compound interest. We got out all the clothes first, in drawers and clothes baskets and tied up in sheets. Eliza wasn't much use. The only thing she could do was look for a bed key to unscrew the iron bedsteads, but Oswald and Dicky toiled on. They carried out chairs and tables and hearth rugs. As Oswald was staggering on under a Windsor armchair with a tea tray and an ironing board under his arms, he ran into a man. "What's up?" said he. "Fire!" said Oswald. "I see that," said the man. Oswald shoved the chair and other things onto the man. "Then lend a hand to get the things away," he said. And more people came and all worked hard, but Oswald and Dicky did most. Eliza never even found that bed key, because when she saw people beginning to come thicker and thicker across the fields like ants hurrying home, she went out and told everyone over and over again that Honeysett had got the key. Then a woman came along, and Eliza got her into a corner by the stairs and jawed. I heard part of the jaw. "And poor Mrs. Singpins, her man he gone to Ashford Market with his piece, and the 3 other men, and me and my man said we'd have Liz up at my place, her being my sister, so as Honeysett could go off to Romney about the sheep. But she wouldn't come, not though we brought the light cart over for her, so we thought it best Honeysett stayed about his work, and go for the sheep tomorrow." "Then the house would have been all empty, but for her not being wishful to go along of you?" Oswald heard the other say. "Yes," said Eliza, "and so you see—" "You keep your mouth shut," the other woman fiercely said. "You're Lily's sister, but Tom, he's my brother. If you don't shut your silly mouth, you'll be getting of them into trouble. It's insured, ain't it?" "I don't see," said Eliza. "You don't never see nothing," said the other. "You just don't say a word, less you're arsed, and then only as you come to look after her and found the fire raging something cruel." "But why—" The other woman clawed hold of her and dragged her away, whispering secretly. All this time the fire was raging, but there were lots of men now to work the well and the buckets, and the house and barn had not caught. When we had got out all the furniture, some of the men set to work on the barn, and of course Oswald and Dicky, though weary, were in this also. They helped to get out all the wool, bundles and bundles and bundles of it, but when it came to sacks of turnip seed and things, they thought they had had enough, and they went to where the things were that had come out of the larder, and they got a jug of milk and some bread and cheese, and took it to the woman who was lying in the dry ditch on the nice bed they had so kindly made for her. She drank some milk and asked them to have some, and they did, with bread and cheese, Dutch, and jolly glad they were of it. Just as we had finished, we heard a shout, and there was a fire engine coming across the field. I do like fire engines. They're so smart and fierce and look like dragons ready to fight the devouring element. It was no use, however, in spite of the beautiful costumes of the firemen, because there was no water, except in the well, and not much left of that. The man named Honeysett had ridden off on an old bone shaker of his to fetch the engines. He had left the key in the place where it was always kept, only Eliza had not had the sense to look for it. He had left a letter for her too, written in red pencil on the back of a bill for a moaning machine. It said, "Rex on fur, going to get fur engines." Oswald treasures this letter still as a memento of happier days. When Honeysett saw the line of men handing up buckets to throw on the tarry wall, he said, "I ain't no manner of use. Wind's changed and now we're gone." And so it had. The flames were now reaching out the other way, and 2 more ricks were on fire. But the tarry walls were quite cool and very wet, and the men who were throwing the water were very surprised to find they were standing in a great puddle. And now, when everything in the house and the barn was safe, Oswald had time to draw his breath and think, and to remember with despair exactly who it was that had launched that devastating fire balloon over the peaceful march. It was getting dusk by this time, but even the splendor of all those burning ricks against the darkening sky were merely wormwood and gall to Oswald's upright heart, and he jolly soon saw that it was the same to Dickie's. "I feel pretty sick," he said. "Let's go home." "They say the whole 11 ricks are bound to go," said Dickie, "with the wind the way it is." "We're bound to go," said Oswald. "Where?" inquired the less thoughtful Dickie. "To prison," said his far-seeing brother, turning away and beginning to walk towards the bicycles. "We can't be sure it was our balloon," said Dickie, following. "Pretty average," said Oswald bitterly. "But no one would know it was us if we held our tongues." "We can't hold our tongues," Oswald said. "If we do, someone else will be blamed. It's sure as fate. You didn't hear what that woman said about insurance money." "We might wait and see if anyone does get into trouble, and then come forward," said Dickie. Oswald owned they might do that, but his heart was full of despair and remorse. Just as they got to their bikes, a man met them. "All lost, I suppose?" he said, jerking his thumb at the blazing farmyard. "Not all," said Dickie. "We saved the furniture and the wool and things." The man looked at us and said heavily, "Very kind of you, but it was all insured." "Look here," said Oswald earnestly. "Don't you say that to anyone else." "Eh?" said the man. "If you do, they're safe to think you set fire to it yourself." He stared, and then he frowned, and then he laughed, and said something about old heads on young shoulders, and went on. We went on too, in interior gloom that only grew gloomier as we got nearer and nearer home. We held a council that night after the little ones had gone to bed. Dora and Alice seemed to have been crying most of the day. They felt a little better when they heard that no one had been burned to death. Alice told me she had been thinking all day of large families burned to little cinders. But about telling of the fire balloon we could not agree. Alice and Oswald thought we ought, but Dickie said, "Wait," and Dora said, "Write to Father about it." Alice said, "No, it doesn't make any difference about our not being sure whether our balloon was the cause of destruction. I expect it was, and anyway, we ought to own up." "I feel so too," said Oswald, "but I do wish I knew how long in prison you got for it." We went to bed without deciding anything. Very early in the morning, Oswald woke, and he got up and looked out the window, and there was a great cloud of smoke still going up from the doomed rickyard. So then he went and woke Alice, and said, "Suppose the police have got that poor farmer locked up in a noisome cell, and all the time it's us." "That's just what I feel," said Alice, and Oswald said, "Get dressed." And when she had, she came out into the road, where Oswald, pale but resolute, was already pacing with firm steps, and he said, "Look here, let's go and tell. Let's say you and I made the balloon. The others can stop out of it if they like." "They won't if it's really prison," said Alice. "But it would be noble of us to try it on. Let's—" "But we found we didn't know who to tell." "It seems so fatal to tell the police," said Alice. "There's no getting out of it afterwards. Besides, he's only Jameson. He's very stupid." The author assures you, you do not know what it is like to have a crime like arsenic on your conscience, and to have gone to the trouble and expense of making your mind up to confess it, and then not to know who to. We passed a wretched day, and all the time the ricks were blazing. All the people in the village went over with carts and bikes to see the fire, like going to a fair or show. In other circumstances we would have done the same, but now we had no heart for it. In the evening Oswald went for a walk by himself, and he found his footsteps turning towards the humble dwelling of the ancient mariner who had helped us in a smuggling adventure once. The author wishes to speak the truth, so he owns that perhaps Oswald had some idea that the ancient mariner, who knew so much about smugglers and highwaymen, might be able to think of some way for us to save ourselves from prison without getting an innocent person put into it. Oswald found the mariner smoking a black pipe by his cottage door. He winked at Oswald as usual. Then Oswald said, "I want to ask your advice, but it's a secret. I know you can keep secrets." When the aged one had agreed to this, Oswald told him all. It was a great relief. The mariner listened with deep attention, and when Oswald had quite done, he said, "It ain't the stone jug this time, mate. That there balloon of yours, I see it go up fine and purty was, too." "We all saw it go up," said Oswald in despairing accents. "The question is, where did it come down?" "And Burmish, sonny," was the unexpected and unspeakably relieving reply. "My sister's husband's niece. It come down and lodged in their pear tree. Showed me it this morning, with the red ink on it what spelled your names out." Oswald, only passing to wring the hand of his preserver, tore home on the wings of the wind to tell the others. I don't think we were ever so glad of anything in our lives. It is a frightfully blighting thing when you believe yourself to be an arsenicator, or whatever it is, of the deepest dye. As soon as we could think of anything but our own cleanness from guilt, we began to fear the worst of Tom Simpkins, the farmer at Crown Ovenden. But he came out of it, like us, without a stain on his fair name, because he and his sister and his man Honeysett all swore that he had given a tramp leave to sleep up against a beanstack the night before the fire, and the tramp's pipe and matches were found there. So he got his insurance money, but the tramp escaped. But when we told Father about it, he said he wished he had been a director of that fire insurance company. We never made another fire balloon. Though it was not us that time, it might have been. And we know now but too well the anxieties of a life of crime. End of The Arsenicators.
Diamonds and Toads. Compiled and edited by Marion Florence Lansing. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time, there was a widow who had 2 daughters. The elder was so much like her, both in looks and in character, that whoever saw the daughter saw the mother. They were both so disagreeable and so proud that there was no living with them. The younger, who was the image of her father in courtesy and sweetness of temper, was one of the most beautiful girls ever seen. As people naturally love those who are like them, this mother doted upon her elder daughter, and at the same time conceived a great aversion to the younger. She made her eat in the kitchen and work continually. Among other things, the poor child had to go twice a day to draw water, more than 1.5 miles from the house, and to bring home a large pitcher full of it. One day, when she was at the fountain, a poor woman came to her and asked her to let her drink. "Oh, yes, with all my heart, goody," said the pretty little girl. Rinsing the pitcher at once, she filled it at the clearest part of the fountain and gave it to her, holding up the pitcher all the while, that she might drink the more easily. Then the good woman said to her, "You are so pretty, so good, and so courteous that I cannot help giving you a gift." For this was a fairy, who had taken the form of a poor countrywoman to see how far the civility and good manners of this young girl would go. "I will give you for a gift," continued the fairy, "that at every word you speak there shall come out of your mouth either a flower or a jewel." When this pretty girl got home, her mother scolded her for staying so long at the fountain. "I ask your pardon, mamma," said the poor girl, "for not making more haste." And as she spoke these words, there fell from her lips 3 roses, 3 pearls, and 4 diamonds. "What do I see here?" said the mother, quite astonished. "I think I see pearls and diamonds come out of the girl's mouth. How happens this, my child?" This was the first time she had ever called her "my child." The girl told her frankly all that had happened to her, dropping from her mouth great numbers of diamonds as she spoke. "Really," cried the mother, "I must send my own dear daughter thither. Fanny, Fanny, look! See what comes out of your sister's mouth when she speaks. Would you not like, my dear, to have the same gift? You have only to go and draw water at the fountain, and when a poor woman asks you to let her drink, to give it to her very civilly." "I should like to see myself going to the fountain to draw water," said this ill-bred minx. "I insist that you go," said the mother, and that at once. So away she went, taking with her the best silver tankard in the house, but grumbling all the way. She no sooner reached the fountain than she saw coming out of the wood a lady, magnificently dressed, who came up to her and asked for a drink. This was the same fairy who had appeared to her sister, but she had now taken the air and the dress of a princess to see how far this girl's rudeness would go. "Am I come here," said the ill-bred, saucy girl, "to serve you with water, pray? I suppose the silver tankard was brought wholly on purpose for your ladyship, was it? I should think so. You must drink out of the fountain if you want any." "You are hardly polite," answered the fairy, without putting herself in a passion. "Well then, since you are so disobliging, I give you for a gift, that at every word you speak there shall come out of your mouth a snake or a toad." As soon as her mother saw her coming, she cried out, "Well, daughter?" "Well, mother," answered the rude girl, throwing out of her mouth a viper and a toad. "Oh, mercy!" cried the mother. "What is this I see? It is her sister who is the cause of all this, but she shall pay for it." And immediately she ran to beat her. The poor child fled away from her, and went to hide herself in the forest near by. The king's son, as he was returning from hunting, met her, and seeing how beautiful she was, asked her what she was doing there all alone, and why she was crying. "Alas, sir, my mother has turned me out of doors." The king's son, seeing 5 or 6 pearls and as many diamonds fall from her mouth, desired her to tell him how that happened. Then she told him the whole story. The king's son fell in love with her, and, considering that such a gift was worth more than any marriage portion anyone else could bring, conducted her to the palace of the king, his father, and there married her. As for her sister, she made herself so much hated that her own mother turned her out of doors. The miserable girl, after wandering about without finding anyone who would take her in, went away to a corner of the wood, and there died. End of Diamonds and Toads by Marian Florence Lansing.
The Dopters by Eileen Cleveland Higgins. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Lemmy! Ooh! Lemmy! Lemmy stopped short in his game of jackstones and looked fearfully over his shoulder. All about him were the rest of the children, unconcerned, playing none the quieter for the reposeful afternoon shadow of the grey, cloister-like walls. At the edge of the yard where the grass was worn off most, he saw the biggest boys, now suspending their game of ball to call to him. In the general cry he recognised the leading, raucous voice of Gus Chapman. Lemmy did not answer. He turned his back and tried to fling his jackstones indifferently. Out of the corner of his eye he could see Gus approaching. "The Dopters, Lemmy! The Dopters are coming!" Gus warned him. In an instant Lemmy was on his feet. Panic-stricken, he fled, leaving his jackstones upon the ground. He put his hands over his ears to shut out the hooting, derisive cries of the boys who did not understand his fear of the Dopters, that horde of individuals who lurked about the home, a constant menace to his happiness. They looked harmless enough, to be sure, in their varied disguises. Some came as jolly, oldish ladies with much candy, and sometimes fat bunches of raisins in their pockets. Others looked for all the world like hearty farmers who might raise apples, both red and yellow. A very deceptive sort, these farmers, who laughed a great deal and poked the boys' muscles and pinched the girls' cheeks. Most to be feared were the Dopters in black, who hung round more than any of the rest. They brought toys hardly worn at all, but they never seemed to want to let them go at the last minute. They made a show of crying over Gracie Peeler and Nanny Baggett, who had curls and knew how to do a curtsy. The doctors in black always made off with someone. Despite the endless variety, it was not hard to tell a doctor if you saw him in time. There was something about them. Most of the children recognized them instinctively. Gus was particularly expert at picking out the doctors from the casual visitors at the home. Watching for them never interfered with his play in the least. He always saw first. Lemmy had learned to trust Gus's signals of danger, and although he was overwhelmed by the accompanying teasing, he felt very grateful. Gus was his saviour. His methods were not to be criticised. Times innumerable Gus had saved him from being adopted. Who knew what it meant, being adopted? Lemmy could not understand why most of the children thought that it was something nice. None of them seemed to realise that there was any reason to be afraid. They were always talking about Tommy Graham, who had been borne off by the doctors. His friends at the home had not seen him since his disappearance, but stories had started somehow about Tommy's having a dog with a schooner back and a train of cars which whizzed around when he pressed a button. It was also said that there was another button which Tommy could press and someone would come to take him for a ride in a sailboat. But all this was mere hearsay. There was no telling what had really befallen Tommy, all because he was foolish enough to sing in the hearing of the doctors his song about 3 frogs that sat on a lily pad. Lemmy was certain that when a doctor threw off his disguise he was a dragon of the very worst kind. It was simple Simon to believe when they talked about this and that you could have if you would only come along. Lemmy knew, for once from behind the office door he had heard them talking to Miss Border, who wore the white of authority. Their remarks about parental history and hereditary instincts and psychological effects of environment had betrayed them. Lemmy remembered how ominous these things had sounded mixed with whoop and hello from the playground, and the queer feeling which had shivered through him. The sensation from eating a mouthful of green gooseberries was nothing in comparison. How could the other children believe that likely as not those words meant something nice? Lemmy knew better. After he had overheard that secret conference with Miss Border, he thought that he understood the doctors pretty well. Theirs was a sticky flypaper method. There was no end to the ways they had of fooling you. They had named him among the least promising. This, Lemmy gathered, on account of his skinny legs, the result of something subnormal, and because of his habit of going off alone into corners, termed sulkiness and uncompanionability. His big ears had something to do with it too. One tall lady had said that they were not exactly Grecian. Altogether he was undesirable. This classification even Gus took to be above board. "They don't want you, Lemmy," Gus repeatedly assured him. "You needn't be so scary." But Gus didn't fathom the duplicity of the doctors. They hatched up all sorts of schemes to make you feel easy and then got you unawares. Likely as not, they knew all the time that he was the littlest boy in the home who could hang by his heels, and that he could hold his breath longer than Gus, and, though it was a secret, that he had a pet toad named Nippy in the broken wall where it was green and wet. They seemed to know everything, the doctors. The thought of these things made Lemmy's heels fly faster. He whisked behind the spirea bushes and drew from underneath the wide-spreading branches a short ladder which he had constructed laboriously from the odds and ends of dry goods boxes. He set up the rickety support and climbed nimbly to the top of the high, broad wall, where the low elm trees hid him from view. He drew the ladder up carefully after him, and with a breath of relief stretched himself at full length, safe from the doctors for a little while at least. It was comfort to have such a place where he could hide unless the doctors came at meal time, when no one could escape. He would not soon forget the time when Lucy Simmons was dragged away just as she had started to eat her piece of blackberry pie. She never came back to finish it. One could never be really safe from the Dopters. There was no let-up to looking out for them. And there would always be Dopters as long as the outside remained. Lemmy was afraid of the outside. He liked to look at it from the top of the wall. It appeared fascinatingly full of mystery, but it always terrified him. There was no place really safe, even bed. Lemmy sighed and squinted through the fluttering leaves at a bit of cloud. After a while it would be getting pink, as it did when supper time came. Baked potatoes and milk, and maybe jam from the long, dark shelves in the vegetable cellar. Lemmy's thoughts flew to the empty barrel in which he intended to hide when winter came on and the elm leaves fell to the ground. It would be hard to get by Mrs. O'Gorman, who was always puttering about the basement with a pad and pencil, muttering unintelligible things under her breath. Perhaps the linen closet would be safer, only they might come when Gerda and Lou were putting away the ironed things. Lemmy's speculations were interrupted by a deep ho ho hum from the other side of the wall. The exclamation had a luxurious sound, as if someone was treating himself to a good rest. Lemmy peered over the edge of the wall and gave a little gasp. There, on the bench beneath, was someone who had undoubtedly stepped out of book covers. He was a big man, a very big man, with a brown skin lined with fine wrinkles which told all sorts of things without his saying a word. His hair was grey, but he looked somehow very young and up to anything lively. His old trousers were turned up, and his coat with its big buttons, flung wide apart, disclosed a faded blouse. From his belt dangled a heavy chain, and from his pocket the end of a jolly coloured handkerchief. His cap had the look of a cap which had been through things. Slowly and comfortably he stretched his long arms, and as his sleeve slipped back, Lemmy caught sight of a tattooed bird, green and blue and red, above his left wrist. And then he flung his head back, and his blue eyes twinkled up at Lemmy without a sign of surprise. "Ahoy, mate!" he called companionably. "Ahoy, Cap'n!" returned Lemmy, laughing in delight. "How's the wind?" "Southwest," Lemmy gave back promptly, "and that's what stirs the water up all purply pink." "Right-o!" The Cap'n slapped his knee in approval. "Wind that makes the lake look like that must come from a place where a feller could find out about magic," Lemmy speculated. "Magic? You want to find out about magic, young man?" The Cap'n sat up with a great show of interest. His eyes were very friendly. "Oh, more'n anything else in the world," Lemmy burst out impulsively. "I want to find out how to make a rose bush pop out of a stovepipe hat, and how to pull fuzzy little chickens out of people's sleeves, and how to pick gold pieces out of the air the way I saw a man do once to make the lumbermen laugh at Camp Cusson. That's where I lived when my daddy used to run the lumber camp until he died, and so did my mother of epidemic." Lemmy caught his breath. "I want to learn how to do magic so I can have fun and make people laugh." The Cap'n chuckled and spread his jolly coloured handkerchief across his knees. From an old brown wallet he took a coin which he twirled merrily in his nimble fingers. "Have a look at this," he said, reaching up to put the coin into Lemmy's hand. Lemmy looked curiously at the strange piece of money which lay in his palm. It was not at all like the dimes and nickels which the Dopters often slid into a fellow's pocket. It was shiny and yellow, the colour of the pin which always fastened Miss Border's collar. It was gold, and there were figures of dragons upon it, guarding words which Lemmy could not read at all, though they were very short. "Heave it into the hanker," directed the Cap'n. Plump into the jolly coloured handkerchief Lemmy dropped the coin. Wide-eyed, He watched the cap'n tie the handkerchief into a knot and twist it smartly to make certain that it was secure. With a fine flourish he flung it high into the air, caught it again deftly and untied the tight knot. Smiling broadly, he spread the handkerchief out upon his knees again. Lemmy stared unbelievingly. The gold coin had vanished, and in its place lay a silver dollar. He blinked at the air in a daze. Very quickly the cap'n retied his handkerchief and tossed it up once more. When he opened it again, wonder of wonders, there was the gold coin. A cry of discovery burst from Lemmy's throat. "You're a magician!" The cap'n beamed and drew from his pocket 1, 2, 3 oranges. He took the gold coin again and carelessly balancing it upon his nose, at the same time tossed the oranges one after the other into the air, juggling them with fine precision so that they rose and fell rhythmically in time to music which the cap'n alone could hear. "They're magicked," Lemmy whispered spellbound, as he eyed the oranges flashing in the air while the coin remained apparently affixed to the cap'n's nose. His eyes grew wider yet when suddenly the cap'n ended his performance by gathering in oranges and coin with one grand sweep, not dropping a thing. "Now hold your hands," the cap'n invited. Before Lemmy could say Jack Robinson, there, right in his own hands, was one of the magician's golden balls. "Shiver my timbers, did you never see an orange before?" the cap'n cried as he watched Lemmy's face. "Not a magician's orange," Lemmy answered, fingering his treasure reverently. "Taste it, young 'un." "Oh, I couldn't." Lemmy's voice carried agony. "The cap'n's orders, eat it and you get another." Still Lemmy hesitated. "I'll have one along with you," the cap'n urged sociably. "I can beat you peeling." The cap'n started to peel one of the erstwhile magic balls. Lemmy dug his teeth quickly into his own orange. The race was on. Lemmy's squeal of victory as he threw down the last bit of rind surprised the cap'n amazingly. "And mine only half peeled," he exclaimed. "You are a quick 'un." Then, quite naturally, Lemmy fell to eating oranges along with the cap'n. "Eating oranges with a magician! What'd Gus say?" Lemmy murmured, half in a trance. "What if I hadn't run away from the Dopters?" "The Dopters?" The cap'n put his head on one side and raised his eyebrows, very much puzzled indeed. "Who are they?" "Oh, the Dopters are always hanging round the home, trying to carry us off. A feller has to watch out all the time. They're sharp as tacks, always trying to fool us by looking something different. Every time they come they change their clothes to put us off the track." "Oh, so you don't like 'em, eh?" "Oh, I'm afraid of 'em. They scare me so." Lemmy's voice quivered pitifully. "All the time I have to think of 'em. I'm never, never safe from the Dopters. I bet they'd poke a feller's eyes out once they got him, or starve him maybe. Oh, I don't know what a Dopter wouldn't do." The cap'n listened gravely. Never once did he laugh as Lemmy poured forth his miserable fear of the Dopters. The cap'n understood. Lemmy could tell that. By the time the oranges had disappeared, Lemmy had told the cap'n all about the Dopters, and even confided the existence of Nippy. "I'll show him to you," Lemmy offered, hustling down the ladder to return with his pet toad upon a wet leaf for exhibition. The cap'n was a gratifying sort. He saw at once Nippy's good points, the beautiful brightness of his eyes, the fine spots upon his back, the superiority of his intellect. Nippy in turn winked his approval at the cap'n as if they had many a joke in common. "As fine a toad as ever sat a rock or sailed the sea," avowed the cap'n enthusiastically. "By the by, young man, how'd you like to take Nippy on a cruise with me?" Lemmy clutched the wall and gazed for one electrical second into the cap'n's eyes. It wasn't a joke. "Can we start now?" Lemmy asked breathlessly. The cap'n bestirred himself instantly. "It's high time to be off. Swing yourself down and I'll catch you." Lemmy ensconced Nippy quickly in the little perforated box which he always kept in his pocket for him. Then he swung himself from the wall straight into the cap'n's arms. It seemed so natural and safe to be walking along outside a hold of a magician's hand. Lemmy's legs took on a fine stride. Down the hill they went with never a look behind at those grey walls, for their eyes were fixed upon the great lake Superior, pulsing now under the wonder touch of the southwest wind, shimmering all the colours of the opal. There lay the boats poking up their brightly painted smokestacks for folks to see. Down, down and down, such a short way, and yet the wonderful farness of it. "Here we are at the docks, the Northern Star waiting for us," the cap'n announced presently. Lemmy swung along a little faster, for there in full sight were the high oar docks stretching far, far into the water. Of course they had been magicked there, thus the wonder of them was explained. The cap'n lifted him to his shoulder and walked along the abutment to one of the biggest freighters nosing the end of the dock. "All aboard the Northern Star," the cap'n said, giving him a lift up the ladder. Lemmy climbed like a little monkey as fast as he could, for fear he wouldn't really get aboard. Straight up to the bridge the cap'n took him. "You can see us load up from here. Keep your eyes open and many a sight you'll see." Lemmy heard the cap'n's words as if in a dream. He looked wonderingly about him. On top of the high dock he could see cars full of reddish, yellowish chunks which the cap'n called iron ore. Hurrying about everywhere were the dock workers, smudged from head to foot with pigment which gave them the look of pirates. With quick calls these men loosened the doors in the bottoms of the cars to let the ore rattle down into the big pockets in the dock. But nearer at hand something more engrossing was happening. Deckhands aboard the Northern Star were opening the hatches. All along the deck of the freighter the hatchways yawned ready for the load of ore. There was a great rattle of cables from above, and down came the chutes into the hatchways. Lemmy could see the men on the dock poking long poles into the pockets to set the ore sliding. The first chunks struck the bottom of the hold thunderingly, and then heavy masses came sliding down the chutes with a steady, rushing sound which thrilled Lemmy like nothing he had ever heard before. It was not long before the big freighter was loaded full of the ore, and one after another the long chutes were drawn back into place against the dock. When the men set about closing the hatchways, the cap'n took Lemmy below to see his quarters. What Lemmy saw first when he entered was an old sea chest. "Have a look in," the cap'n suggested, following Lemmy's gaze. "It's chock full of stuff from everywhere." He threw back the lid, and Lemmy had a whiff of tar and tobacco and salt, an indescribable smell, suggesting untold adventure. Chock full the chest was of all manner of wonderful things: compasses and shells, quadrants and gaudy strips of silk, battered old books, squinty-eyed monkeys carved out of ivory, long strings of many-coloured beads, chains, silver and copper and gold, all strung with bangles. There was no end to the treasure store. The cap'n took a cutlass from the chest and balanced it upon his nose as easily as he had poised the coin there. "See here, young 'un," he said suddenly, "you're old enough to start learning magic." A golden mist swam before Lemmy's eyes. You mean to learn to be a magician?" "A sort of ABC magician, yes. Here, take this." He thrust into Lemmy's hand a carved ebony ring. "I'll show you how to make it disappear." Very patiently the cap'n initiated Lemmy into the rudiments of magic, teaching him how to exhibit with a flourish before imaginary spectators, then with an adroit pass to make it disappear until he chose by a swift movement to hold it once more in full view between his thumb and finger. The mastery of the old trick, dependent only upon a little dexterity and sleight of hand, filled Lemmy with enormous pride. He glowed with delight at the cap'n's applause, mingled with the easily imagined hand-clapping from the invisible audience. He was lifted far, far away from commonplace things. He was a novitiate in a new world of unending mystery and delight. He tried to say "thank you" to the cap'n, but his gratitude overwhelmed him. He could only press the ring back reverently into the cap'n's hand. There were no words for a thing such as this. Then came a noise at the door. At the cap'n's bidding in walked a burly fellow as big as the cap'n himself. "Look at the young 'un, Andy MacDonald. He's off with us to-night," the cap'n informed him. "Bless my soul!" Andy MacDonald exclaimed, touseling Lemmy's hair. "The Northern Star's in luck. Now Andy'll find you a proper place for Nippy, and I'll be off on a bit of business before we set out." The cap'n left him with Andy MacDonald, who knew exactly where to catch flies for Nippy, and where to get pebbles to his liking, and where to find just the sort of safe, dampish corner where he could voyage happily. And MacDonald was very ingenious at devising quarters which would give Nippy plenty of room and yet keep him in bounds. "He might jump overboard in his sleep, you know, dreaming like," Andy MacDonald remarked as he screened Nippy in. As soon as Nippy was settled, Andy gave a shrill whistle which brought Chink, the rat terrier mascot of the boat, tearing to make Lemmy's acquaintance. "He's got a collar with spikes on it," Lemmy cried excitedly, "and a piece of his ears nipped off." "He gets scarred up, Chink does, but he never gets licked. Don't let him get in a row with Nippy." How could Lemmy know that during these enchanted moments with Andy MacDonald the cap'n was talking with Miss Border about parental history and hereditary instincts and all the rest of the doctor's secrets? It was at table that Lemmy saw the cap'n again, the head of a feast befitting a magician such as he. Lemmy tried hard not to gobble, but the chicken was oh so tender, and he had never before tasted what the cap'n called kumquats. There was so much he couldn't possibly eat it all. He finally gave up trying when the cap'n assured him that there would be more tomorrow. Up on the bridge again, Lemmy watched the busy engine hauling the cables which held the freighter to the dock. A capable little tug, which the cap'n called familiarly Sultana, came to help them head the boat into the channel. "We're off!" cried the cap'n as the Sultana chug-chugged away, while with slow majesty the Northern Star made its way out into the lake. "Look behind at the diamond necklace," Andy called to him. Turning to look back, Lemmy saw the Alloway ore docks, glittering, palpitating, in the fast-gathering purple of the night. Upon the hill electric signs blazed out fantastically. Here a red sun rising over a green hill, and farther on a multicoloured fan opening and closing with a bewildering flash. Then came a comical, twinkling bucket of shiny paint which would bubble over. Past the signs came rows and rows of lights, set regularly like soldiers. The Northern Star was moving faster now, passing between the big piers of the canal under the aerial bridge, past the lighthouse with revolving signals. A big passenger boat coming into the harbour passed them swiftly, giving two long whistles by way of greeting. Lemmy caught the tinkle of music and the sound of people laughing on board. Then suddenly they were gone. Out, out, past all the lights went the Northern Star, straight into the silver-white moon path stretching endlessly across the water. Lemmy looked up at the winking stars and leaned comfortably back against the Captain's arm. "I'm safe now from the Dopters," he whispered exultantly. "We've given them the slip," the Captain assured him. "They'll never get you now." Dreamily, with his head upon the Captain's shoulder, Lemmy happily fingered the ebony ring which had, somehow, got magicked into his pocket. End of The Dopters by Eileen Cleveland Higgins. Read by Garth Burton.
Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alexandria Adair. Camarillo, California, April 2026. Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. The Enchanceried House. A story about the Bastables. The adventure which I'm about to relate was a very long time ago, and it was nobody's fault. The part of it that was most like a real crime was caused by H.O. not being at that date old enough to know better. And this was nobody's fault, though he took care that but a brief half-hour elapsed between the discovery of his acts and his being old enough to know better, and knowing it too, better I mean, quite thoroughly. We were residing at the residence of an old nurse of father's, while Dora was engaged in the unagreeable pastime of having something catching at home. If she had been with us, most likely none of this would have happened, for she has almost an unerring nose for right and wrong. Or perhaps what the author means is that she never does the kind of thing that grown-ups don't like you're doing. Father's old nurse was very jolly to us, and it did not bother much, except about wet feet and being late for meals and not airing your shirt before you put it on. But it is part of the nature of the nicest grown-ups to bother about these little things, and we must not be hard on them for it, for no one can help their natures. The part where old nurse's house was where London begins to leave off being London, but before it can make up its mind not to be it. There are fields and bits of lanes and hedges, but the rows of ugly little houses go creeping along like yellow caterpillars eating up the green fields. There are brick fields here and there and cabbage fields in places where rhubarb is grown, and it is much more interesting than real town because there is more room to do things in, and not so many people to say don't when you do. Nurse's house was the kind that is always a house, no matter how much you pretend it is a baron's castle or an enchanted place. And to play at it being a robber's cave or any part of a pirate ship is simply silly, and of no satisfaction to anyone. There were no books except sermons in the Wesleyan magazine, and there was a green cut paper fuzziness on the frame of the looking-glass in the parlor. There was a garden, at least there was enough ground for one, but nothing grew there except nettles and brickbats and one elder tree and a poor old oak that had seen better days. There was a hole in the fence, very convenient for going through in a hurry. One morning, there had been what old nurse called a set-out, because Noel was writing some of his world without end poetry, and he had got as far as, "How beautiful the sun and moon and all the stars appear. They really are a long way off, although they look very near. I do not think that they are worlds but apples on a tree. The angels pick them whenever they like, but it is not so with me. I wish I was a little angel child to gather stars for my tea." Before Dickie found out he was writing out on the blank leaf at the end of the Latin prize Dickie got at the preparatory school. Noel, for mysterious reasons unknown to fame, is Alice's favorite brother. And of course she stood up for him and said he didn't mean it. And things were said on both sides, and the rest of us agreed with Dickie that Noel was old enough to know better. It ended in Alice and Noel going out for a walk by themselves as soon as Noel had had the crying washed off his face and hands. The rest of us spent the shining hours in getting a board and nailing it up in the oak tree for a lookout station, in case of Saracens arriving with an army to attack London. The oak is always hard to climb, and this was a particularly hard day, because the next door people had tied a clothesline to the oak, and hung their wet washing out on the line. The sun was setting, in the west as usual, before Alice and Noel returned. They came across the wide fields from the direction of a pine wood that we had never explored yet, though always meaning to. "There," said Dickie. "They've been and gone to the pine wood all by themselves." But the hatchet Dickie was still cherishing in his breast was buried at once under the first words spoken by the returning party of explorers. "Oh, Oswald!" said Alice. "Oh, Dickie, we found a treasure!" Dickie hammered the last nail into the Saracen watchtower. "Not a real money one," he said, dropping the hammer, which was a careless thing to do, and the author told him so at the time. "No, not a money one, but it's real all the same. Let's have a council and I'll tell you." It was then that Dickie showed that if he dropped hammers, it was not because he could not bury hatchets. He said, "Righto, there's room for us all up here. Catch old Noel, Oswald give him a shove up. Alice and he can sit in the Saracen's watchtower and I'll keep hold of H.O. if you'll hand him up." Alice was full of the politest compliments about the architecture of the Saracen's watchtower, and Noel said, "I say, Dickie, I'm awfully sorry about your prize." "It's all right," said Dickie. "I rubbed it out with bread." Noel opened his mouth. He looks like a very young bird when he does this. "Then my beautiful poems turned into dirty breadcrumbs," he said slowly. "Never mind," said Alice. "I remember nearly every word of it. We'll write it out again after tea." "I thought you'd be pleased," Noel went on, "because it makes a book more valuable to have an author's writing in it. Albert's uncle told me so." "But it has to be the same author that wrote the book," Alice explained. "And it was Caesar that wrote that book. And you aren't Caesar yet, you know." "Nor want to be," said Noel. Oswald now thought that politeness was satisfied on both sides, so he said, "What price treasures?" And then Alice told. But it had to be in whispers, because the next door people, who always did things at times when not convenient to us, were now taking in their washing off the line. I heard them remark that it was a good drying day. "Well," Alice mysteriously observed, "it was like this. Do you think the Saracen's watchtower is really safe for two? It seems to go down awfully much in the middle." "Sit nearer the ends, then," said Oswald. "Well?" "We thought we would go to the pine woods because of reading in Bret Harte that the resinous balsam of the pine is healing to the wounded spirit." "I should have thought if anybody's spirit was wounded," said Dickie, in tones of heatening indignantness. "Yes, I know, but you got the oak, and I expect oaks are just as good, if not better, especially for English people, because of Oak Apple Day and... where was I?" We told her. "So we went, and it is a very nice wood, quite tulgey, you know. We expected to see a bandersnatch every minute, didn't we, Noel? It's not very big, though, and on the other side there's an enchanted desert, rather bare with patches of grass and brambles. And in the very middle of it we found the treasure." "Let's have a squint at the treasure," said Dickie. "Did you fetch it along?" Noel and Alice sniggered. "Not exactly," said Alice. "The treasure is a house." "It's an enchanted house," said Noel, "and it's a deserted house, and the garden is like in The Sensitive Plant, after the lady has given up attending." "Did you go in?" we asked. "No," said Alice. "We came back for you, and we asked an old man, and he did say it was in Chancery, so no one can live in it." H.O. asked what was in Chancery. "I'm certain the old man meant enchanted," said Noel. "Only I expect that's the old-fashioned word for it. Enchanceried is a very nice word, and it means an enchanted house, just like I said." Nurse now came out to remark, "Tea, my dears." So we left the Saracen's tower and went into that meal. Noel began to make a poem called The Enchanceried House, but we got him to stop, till there was more for him to write about. There soon was more, and more enough, as it turned out. The setting sun had set, but it had left a redness in the sky, like one of those distant fires you go after, and they're always miles from where you are, which shone through the pine trees. The house looked black and mysterious against the strawberry ice-colored horizon. It was a good-sized house. The bottom floor windows were boarded up. It had a sensitive planted garden and a paved yard and outhouses. The garden had a high wall with glass on top, but Oswald and Dickie got into the yard. Green grass was growing between the paving stones. The corners of the stable and coach-house doors were rough, as if from the attacks of rats, but we never saw any of these stealthy rodents. The back door was locked, but we climbed up on the water butt and looked through a little window and saw a plate rack and a sink with taps and a copper and a broken coal scuttle. It was very exciting. The day after we went again, and this time we borrowed the next door people's clothesline, and by tying it in loops made a sort of rope ladder, and then all of us got over. We had a glorious game besieging the pigsty, and all the military orders had to be given in whisper for fear of us being turned out if anyone passed and heard us. We found the pine wood in the field, and the house had got all boards to say what would be done to trespassers with the utmost rigor of the law. It was such a swat untying the knots in the next door people's clothesline that we only undid one, and then we bought them a new pocket line with our own pocket money, and kept the rope ladder hidden in a bed of nettles, always on the spot and ready for us. We found a way of going round and getting to the house through a hole in the hedge and across a lane, so as not to go across the big fields where every human eye can mark our proceedings and come after us and tell us not to. We went there every day. It would have been a terrible thing if an army of bloodthirsty Saracens had chosen that way to march on London, for there was hardly ever a lookout in the tower now. It was a jolly place to play in, and Oswald had found out what Enchancery really means, so he had no fear of being turned into a pig-headed lady or a marble from the waist down. And after a bit, we began to want to get into the house, and we wanted it so much our hearts got quite cold about the chicken house and the pigsty, which at first had been a fairy dream of delight. But all the doors were locked. We got all the old keys we could, but they were all the keys of desks and workboxes and tea caddies, not the right size or shape for doors. Then one day Oswald, with his justly celebrated observingness, noticed that one of the bars was loose in the brickwork of a sort of half-underground window. To pull it out was to the lion-hearted youth but the work of a moment. He got down through the gap thus obtained and found himself in a place like a very small area, only with no steps, and with bars above him, broken glass and matted rags and straw beneath his enterprising boots, and on one side a small cobwebby window. He got out again and told the others, who were trying to get up the cobblestones by the stable so as to make an underground passage into the stable at the ratty end of its door. They came at once, and, after a brief discussion, it was decided to break the window a little more than it was already, and to try and get in a hand that could unlatch the window. Of course, as Oswald had found the bar, it was to be his hand. The dauntless Oswald took off his jacket, and, wrapping it round his fist, shoved at the pane nearest the window fastening. The glass fell inwards with the noise you would expect. In newspapers, I suppose they would call it a sickening thud. Really, it was a sort of hollow tinkling sound. It made even Oswald jump, and H.O. said, "Suppose the window opens straight into a bottomless well." We did not think this likely, but you cannot be too careful when you are exploring. Oswald got in his hand and undid the window fastening, which was very rusty. The window opened out like a door. There was only just room in the area under the bars for Oswald and the opening of the window. He leaned forward and looked in. He was not surprised to find that it was not a well after all, but a cellar. "Come on," he said, "it's all right." Dicky came on so rapidly his boots grazed the shoulder of the advancing Oswald. Alice was coming next, but Noel begged her to wait. "I don't think H.O. ought to go in till we're sure it's safe," he said, and Oswald hopes it was not because Noel was in a funk himself, though with a poet you never know. The cellar into which Oswald now plunged had a damp and mouldering smell, like of mousetraps and straw and beer barrels. Another cellar opened out of it, and in this there was traces of coal having existed into other ages. Passing the coal cellar, we went out to a cellar with shelves on the wall like berths on a ship, or the catacombs where early Christians used to be bricked up. Of course, we knew it was only a wine cellar because we have one at home. Matches had to be used here. Then we found a flight of stone steps and went up. And Oswald is not ashamed to own that, the staircase being of a twisty nature. He did think what it would be like if he and Dicky were to meet something at one of the corners. But always peace and solitude. Yet it was with joy and like the meeting of an old friend that we got out of the cellar stairs and through a door to the back kitchen, where the sink was, and the copper and the plate rack. Oswald felt like a brother to the broken coal scuttle. Our first instant thought was the back door. It was bolted top and bottom, and the bolts were sort of cemented into their places with rust. But they were unable to resist our patient and determined onslaught. Only when we had undone them the door kept shut, and by stooping down and looking in we saw this was because it was locked. Dicky at once despaired and said, "It's no go." But the resourceful Oswald looked round, and there was a key on a nail, which shows how wrong it is to despair. It was not the right key, proving later to be the key at the chicken house. So we went to the hall. There was a bunch of keys on a nail on the back of the front door. "There, now you see I was right," remarked Oswald. And he was, as is so often the case. All the keys had labels, and one of these said, "Back Kitchen," so we applied it at once, and the locked door yielded to it. "You can bring H.O. in quite safely," Oswald said when the door had creakingly consented to open itself and disclose the sunshine, and the paved yard with the paving stones marked out with green grass and the interested expressions on the faces of on the others. "It's quite safe. It's just a house like anyone else's, only hasn't got any furniture in it." We went all over the room. There were 14 rooms altogether, 15 if you counted the back kitchen where the plate warmer was, and the copper in the sink with the taps, and the brotherly coal scuttle. The rooms were quite different from the ones in old Nurse's house. Noel said he thought all the rooms in this house had been the scene of duels or elopements, or concealing rightful heirs. The present author doesn't know about that, but there was a splendid cupboardiness about the place that spoke volumes to a discerning eye. Even the window seats, of which there were 6, lifted up like the lids of boxes, and you could have hidden a flying cavalier in any of them, if he had been of only medium height and slender build, like heroes with swords so often are. Then there were 3 staircases, and these must have been darkly convenient for getting conspirators away when the king's officers were at the door, as so constantly happened in romantic times. The whole house was full of ideas for ripping games, and when we came away Alice said, "We must be really better than we know. We must have done something to deserve a find like this." "Don't worry," said Oswald. Albert's uncle says you always have to pay for everything. We haven't paid for this yet. This reflection, like so many of our young heroes, was correct. I have not yet told you about the finest find of all the fine finds that we found finally. That looks very odd, and I'm not sure if it's Ality what's-his-name or only carelessness. I wonder whether other authors are ever a prey to these devastating doubts? This find was on the top floor. It was a room with bars to the windows, and it was a very odd shape. You went along a passage to the door, and then there was the room, but the room went back along the same way as the passage had come. So when you went round there, no one could see you from the door. The door was sort of in the middle of the room, but I see I must draw it for you, or you'll never understand. The door that is marked another door was full of agitated excitement for us, because it wasn't a door at all, at least not the kind that you are used to. It was a gate, like you have at the top of nursery stairs in the mansions of the rich and affluent, but instead of being halfway up, it went all the way up, so that you could see into the room through the bars. "Somebody must have kept tame lunatics here," said Dickie.
Or bears,
said H.O.
or Enchanceried princes, said Noel. It seems silly, though, said Alice, because the lunatic or the bear or the enchanted prince could always hide round the corner when he heard the keepers coming, if he didn't happen to want to show off just then.
This was so, and the deep mystery of the way this room was built was never untwisted.
Perhaps a Russian prisoner was kept there, said Alice, and they did not want to look too close for fear he would shoot them with his bomb gun. Poor man, perhaps he got vodka, or other of those awful foreign diseases, and died in his hidden confinement.
It was a most ripping room for games. The key of it was on the bunch labeled Mrs. S.'s room. We often wondered who Mrs. S. was. "Let's have a regular round of gaieties," said Oswald. "Each of us to take it in turns to have the room and act what they like, and the others look through the bars." So the next day we did this. Oswald, of course, dressed up in bath towels and a sheet as the ghost of Mrs. S., but Noel and H.O. screamed it would not be calm till he tore off the sheet and showed his knickerbockers and braces as a guarantee of good faith. Alice put her hair up, and got a skirt and a large handkerchief to cry in, and was a hapless maiden imprisoned in a tower because she would not marry the wicked Baron. Oswald instantly took the part of the wicked Baron, and Dickie was the virtuous lover of low degree, and they had a splendid combat, and Dickie carried off the lady. Of course, that was the proper end of the story, and Oswald had to pretend to be beaten, which was not the case. Dickie was Louis XVI, watchmaking while waiting for the guillotine to happen. So we were the guillotine, and he was executed in the paved yard. Noel was an imprisoned troubadour dressed in bright antimacassars, and he fired off quite a lot of poetry at us before we could get the door open, which was most unfair. H.O. was a clown. He had no fancy dress except flour and 2 Turkish towels pinned on to look like trousers, but he put the flour all over himself, and it took the rest of the day to clean him. It was when Alice was drying the hairbrushes that she had washed after brushing the flour out of Noel's hair in the back garden that Oswald said, "I know what that room was made for." And everyone said, "What?" Which is not manners, but your brothers and sisters do not mind because it saves time. "Why, coiners," said Oswald. "Don't you see? They kept a sentinel at the door, and if anyone approached, he whispered, 'Cave.'" "But why have iron bars?" "In extra safety," said Oswald, "and if their nefarious fires were not burning, he need not say cave at all. It's no use saying anything for nothing." It is curious, but the others did not seem to see this clear distinguishedness. All people have not the same fine brains. But all the same, the idea rankled in their hearts, and one day Father came and took Dickie up to London about that tooth of his, and when Dickie came back, he said, "Look here, talking of coiners, there was a man in St. Swithin's Lane today selling little bottles of yellow stuff, and he rubbed some of it on a penny, and it turned the penny into a half-crown before your eyes, a new half-crown. It was a penny a bottle, so I bought 3 bottles.
"I always thought the plant for coining was very expensive," said Alice.
"Ah, they tell you that to keep you from doing it because of its being a crime," said Dickie. "But now I've got this stuff, we can begin to be coiners right away. I believe it isn't really a crime unless you try to buy things with the base coin." So that very afternoon, directly after dinner, which had a suet pudding in it that might have weighed down the enterprising spirit of anyone but us, we went over to the Enchanceried House. We found our good rope ladder among its congealing bed of trusty nettles, and got over into the paved yard and through the kitchen door. Oswald always carried the key of this hung round his neck by a bootlace, as if it was a talisman or the hair of his lost love. Of course, Oswald never had a lost love. He would scorn the action. But some heroes do have. De gustibus something or other, which means one man's meat is another man's poison. When we got up into the room with the iron-grated door, it all seemed very bare. 3 bottles of yellow stuff and 10 pence halfpenny in coppers is not much to start a coining enterprise with. "We ought to make it look like coining anyway," said Oswald. "Coiners have furnaces," said Dickie. Alice said, "Wouldn't a spirit lamp do?
Old Nurse has got one on the scullery shelf.
We thought it would. Then Noel reminded us that coiners have molds, and Oswald went and bought a pair of wooden lemon squeezers for 7 pence 3 farthings. In his far-sightedness, he remembered that coiners use water, so he bought 2 enameled iron bowls at 6 pence halfpenny the 2. When he came back, he noticed a coal scuttle we had always felt so friendly to, and filled it with water and brought it up. It did not leak worth mentioning. "We ought to have a bench," said Dickie. "Most trades have that, shoemakers and watchmakers and tailors and lawyers." This was difficult, but we did it. There were some planks in the cellar, and a tub and a beer barrel. Unluckily, the tub and the beer barrel were not the same height, but we taught them better by getting Old Nurse's Pilgrim Progress and the Wesleyan Magazine to put on top of the tub, and then it was as high as the barrel, and we laid the boards across, and there was a bench as beautiful as you could wish it. Dickie was allowed to put the stuff on the coins, because he had bought the bottles with his own money. But Alice held them for him to do, because girls are inferior beings, except when you are ill, and you must be kind to them or you need never hope to be a hero. There are drawbacks to every ambition. She let Noel hold them part of the time. When she was not helping Dickie, she tried covering pennies with the silver paper off chocolate, but it was not the kind of success that would take anyone in. H.O. and Noel took it in turns to be sentinel, but they said it was dull, so Oswald took it on. And before he had been there 3 minutes, he cried, "Hist! Someone approaches!" And the coining materials were hastily concealed, and everyone hid round the corner, like we had agreed we would do if disturbed in our unlawful pursuits. Of course, there wasn't anyone really. After this, the kids wanted to be sentinels again, but Oswald would not let them. It was a jolly good game, and there was something about that house that made whatever you played in it seem awfully real. When I was Mrs. S, I felt quite unhappy, and when Dickie was the unfortunate monarch who perished in the French Revolution, he told me afterwards he didn't half like it when it came to the guillotine, though of course he knew the knife was only the little sliding door of the chicken house. We played coiners for several days, and all learned to give the alarm, but we were beginning to feel it was time for something new. Noel was saving the hairs out of his comb, and pulling them out of the horsehair sofa in the parlor to make a hair shirt to be a hermit in, and Oswald had bought a file to get through the bars and be an escaped Bastille prisoner, leaving his life history concealed in the fireplace when the great event occurred. We found the silvered money turned to a dirty black when a few hours had elapsed, and we tried silver paint and gold paint. Our pockets were always full of silver and gold money. We could jingle it and take it out in handfuls and let people see it, not too near. Then came the great eventful day. H.O. had fallen into the water butt that morning. We dried his holland smock, but it went stiff like paper, so that Old Nurse noticed it and thus found out he was wringing wet underneath. So she put him to bed for fear of his catching his death of cold, and this inveterate gang of coiners had to go to their fell lair without him. We left all our false money at home, because Old Nurse had given Alice a piece of trimming, for dolls, that was all over little imitation silver coins, called sequences, I believe, to imitate the coinage of Turkish regions. We reached our Enchanceried House, got in as usual, and started with our desperate work of changing silver sequences into gold half-sovereigns with gold paint. Noel was very grumpy. He was odd altogether that day. He was trying to write a poem about a Bastille prisoner. He has to be sentry, so we could think about rhymes. We had not coined more than about 4 half-sovereigns when we heard Noel say, "Hist! Hide the plant!" We didn't take any notice, because we wanted to get enough of them to play a game of misers, which was Alice's idea. "Hist!" Noel said again, and then suddenly he rushed in and said, "It's a real hist, I tell you! There's someone on the stairs!" And he shut the wooden grated door, and Oswald, with rare presence of mind, caught up the bunch of keys and locked the wooden grated door with the key labeled Mrs. S.'s room. Then, breathless and furtive, we all hid in the part of the room near the fireplace, where no one could see us from the door. We hardly dared to breathe. Alice said afterwards she could hear Oswald's heart beating with terror, but the author is almost sure it was only his watch ticking. It had begun to go that week, after days of unexplained idleness. If we did have to pay for finding the Enchanceried House, this was when we paid. There were feet on the stairs. We all heard them, and voices. The author distinctly heard the words, "replete with every modern inconvenience," and "pleasantly situate 10 minutes from tram and rail." And Oswald, at least, understood that somehow or other our house had got itself disenchanceried, and that the owner was trying to let it. We held our breaths till they were nearly choked out of us. The steps came nearer and nearer. They came along the passage and stopped at the door. "This is the nursery," said a manly voice. "Unlocked. I quite understood from the agent that the keys were in the hall." Of course, we had the keys, and this was the moment that Noel chose for dropping them. Why he was fingering them where they lay on the mantelpiece, the author does not know and never will know. There is something about previously demented in some Latin chap, Virgil or Lucretius. It seems to hit the nail on the head. The keys fell on the cracked hearthstone with a clang that Oswald, at any rate, will never forget. There was an awful silence. Quite a long one. Then another voice said, "There's someone in there." "Look at that bench," said the other man. "It's coiner's work. That's what it is, but there's nobody there. The keys must have blown down." The two voices talked some time, but we could not hear all their conversation. We were all wondering, as it turned out afterwards, what exactly the utmost rigor of the law was. Because of course we knew we were trespassers of the very deepest dye, even if we could prove that we were not real coiners. "No," we heard one of them say. "If we go for the police, very likely the gang will return and destroy everything. There's no one here now, let's secure the evidence. We can easily break the door down." It is a sickening feeling when the evidence against you is going to be secured, and you don't know what the punishment for coining is, or whether anyone will believe you if you say you were only playing at it. We exchanged pallid glances. We could hear the two men shaking the door, and we had no means of knowing just how weak it was, never having seriously tampered with it ourselves. It was then that Noel suddenly went quite mad. I think it was due to something old nurse had read to us at breakfast that day of a boy of 8 who played on the fiddle and composed pieces of music. Affected young ass. He darted from us into the middle of the room where the two intruders could see him, and said, "Don't break down the door! The villains may return any moment and destroy you! Fetch the police!" The surprised outsiders could find no word but, "You are surprised to see me here," said Noel, not taking any notice of the furious looks of the rest of us. "I'm an infant prodigy. I play the violin at concerts. I play it beautifully. They take me to London to play in a closed carriage so that I can't tell anyone my woes on the way." "My poor child," said one of the outsiders. "Tell us all about it. We must rescue you." "Born of poor but honest parents," said Noel. And this was what Nurse had read out to us. "My musical talent early manifested itself on a toy violin. The gift of a devoted great-aunt. Torn from my home, I'd say, do fetch the police. If the monsters who live on my violin-playing return and find you here, they will brain you with the tools of their trade, and I shall be lost." "Their trade?" said one of them. "What trade?" "They are coiners," said Noel, "as well as what they do to make me play." "But if we leave you?" "Oh, they won't hurt me," cried Noel, "because I have to play tonight at Exeter Hall. Fly! Fly for the police! They may come up behind you at any moment and cleave you to the chine." And they actually flew. The present author would have known instantly that it was rot about cleaving chines, but the man who wanted to let the Disenchanted House and the man who wanted to have it let to him were of other metal. We had remained perfectly still and silent. Of course, if the outsiders had attacked Noel, his brothers would have rushed to his rescue. As soon as the retreating boots of the outsiders grew fainter on the stairs, Noel turned green, and had to be revived by splashings from the Beverly coal scuttle full of water. He got better directly, and we all scooted home to old nurses, leaving our coining plant without a pang. All great generals say that a retreat is best conducted without impediments. Noel was so ill he had to go to bed and stay there. This was as well because of the neighborhood being scoured for the ill-used infant prodigy that had been imprisoned in the Enchanceried House. He got all right in time to go home when Father came up for us. When he was in bed, he wrote a long poem in 6 different colored chalks called The Enchanceried Coiners, or The Liar's Remorse, so I know that he was sorry for what he had done. He told me he could not think of what made him, and of course it was very wrong, but it did save our bacon and preserve us from the noisome cells and bread and water that I'm sure are the real meaning of the utmost rigor of the law. Really the worst of it all was that while we were trembling in the coiner's den, with the 2 outside gentlemen snorting and whispering on the other side of the gate door, H.O. had got up out of his bed at home and answered the door. Old Nurse had gone out to get a lettuce and an aerated loaf for tea. He answered it to a butcher's bill for 15 and 7 pence that the butcher's little girl had brought, and he paid for it with 6 of the pennies we had disguised as half-crowns, and told the little girl to call for the 7 pence in the morning. I believe many people have been hanged for less. It was lucky for H.O. that the old nurse was a friend of the butcher's, and able to persuade him that it was only a joke. In sterner times, like the French Revolution, but Alice does not like to think what would have happened then. As this is the 20th century, not the 18th, are all going down to the butcher and saying we were sorry, made it right. But suppose it had been in other days. The butcher's wife gave us cake and ginger wine. It was very jolly. She asked us where we had got the false half-crowns. Oswald said they had been given us. This was true, but when they were given us, they were pennies. Does Oswald tell a lie to the butcher? He has often wondered. He hopes not. It is easy to know whether a thing is a lie or not when nothing depends on it. But when events are happening, the utmost rigor of the law may be the result of your making a mistake. You have to tell the truth as carefully as you can. No English gentleman tells a lie. Oswald knows that, of course. But an Englishman is not obliged to criminalate himself. The rules of honor and the laws of your country are very puzzling and contradictory. But the butcher got paid afterwards in real money, a half-sovereign and 2 half-crowns and 7 unsilvered pennies. So nobody was injured, and the author thinks that is the great thing after all. All the same, if ever he goes to stay with old nurse again, he thinks he will tell the butcher, all in confidence. He does not like to have any doubts about such a serious thing as the honor of a Bastable. End of The Enchanceried House.
Fair Goldilocks by Madame d'Aulnoy. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There was once a king's daughter who was so beautiful that nothing in the world could be compared with her. And because she was so beautiful, and because her hair was finer than spun gold and fell in waves to her feet, she was called Princess Goldilocks. She always wore a crown of flowers. Her dresses were embroidered with diamonds and pearls, and everyone who saw her loved her. In a neighboring country, there lived a young king who was not married, and who was very handsome and very rich. When he heard all that was said about fair Goldilocks, before he had ever seen her, he fell so deeply in love with her that he could neither eat nor drink for thinking of her. He determined to send an ambassador to ask for her hand in marriage. He had a splendid coach made for his ambassador, and giving him more than 100 horses and 100 servants, he charged him well to bring the princess back with him. After the ambassador had departed, nothing else was talked of at the court but his mission. The king felt so sure of Goldilocks' consent that he set his people to making beautiful dresses for her and splendid furniture for her suite of rooms. Meanwhile, the ambassador reached her court and delivered his message. But either the princess did not happen to be in a good humor that day, or the offer did not suit her fancy, for she told the ambassador that she thanked the king, but she had no desire to marry. The ambassador left the princess's court feeling very much cast down at his failure. He was bringing back all the gifts that the king had sent her, for the princess was too well brought up to accept the pearls and diamonds when she was refusing the king. But in order not to give offense, she kept a little package of English pins. When the ambassador reached the king's capital, where the king was waiting impatiently, everyone was in great distress because he had not brought fair Goldilocks back with him. The king wept like a child, and no one could console him. Now there was at the court a young man who was handsomer and more gifted than anyone else in the kingdom. Because of his grace and his ready wit, he was called Charming. Everyone liked him except a few people who were jealous of him because the king showed him favor and made him his confidant. One day, Charming was with some people who were talking about the ambassador's return and were saying that his visit did not seem to have done much good. Without thinking very much what he was saying, Charming remarked, "If the king had sent me to Princess Goldilocks, I am sure she would have come back with me." Then these telltales ran straight to the king and said, "Your Majesty, what do you think Charming has been saying? That if he had been sent to Princess Goldilocks, he would have brought her back with him. Did you ever hear of such impudence? He thinks he is handsomer than you, and that she would have fallen so deeply in love with him that she would have followed him anywhere." The king was beside himself with anger. "Ha ha," said he. "So this spoiled youngster laughs at my misfortune, does he? And thinks himself better than his king? Go and put him in my great tower, and let him die of hunger." The king's guards went to fetch Charming, who had quite forgotten his idle speech, and dragged him off to prison with all kinds of violence. The poor boy had only a little straw for his bed, and he would have died had it not been for a little stream which flowed through the tower, at which he could get water to cool his parched tongue. One day, when he was in despair, he cried aloud, "What can I have done to offend the king? He is not a more faithful subject than I. I have never done a thing to harm him." The king happened to be passing near the tower and heard the voice of his former favorite. He stopped to listen, in spite of the efforts of Charming's enemies, who tried to persuade him to have nothing to do with the traitor. But the king said, "Let me alone. I want to hear what he is saying." At the sound of Charming's laments, tears filled the king's eyes, and he opened the tower door and called to him. Charming came forward in a pitiable state, and throwing himself at the king's feet, said, "What have I done, sire, to deserve this cruel treatment?" "You mocked me and my ambassador," said the king. "You said that if you had been sent for Princess Goldilocks, you would have brought her back." "It is true, your majesty," replied Charming. "I should have told her so much about you and your good qualities that she would not have been able to refuse you. But I cannot see what there is in that to displease you." When the king considered it from this point of view, he could not see anything in it to make him angry, and began to frown fiercely on those who had made him believe ill of his favorite. He took the boy away with him, repenting deeply the wrong he had done him. When he had seen to it that Charming had a good supper, he called him to his private room and said, "Charming, I am as much in love as ever with fair Goldilocks. Her refusal has made no difference in my feelings, but I do not know how to gain her consent. I should like to send you to see if you could succeed." Charming replied that he was ready to fulfill his king's least wish, and would set out the next morning. "But wait," said the king, "I want to provide you with a fine escort." "There is no need of that," answered Charming. "I want only a good horse and letters from you." The king was delighted at his willingness to start so soon, and provided him with what he needed. It was on a Monday morning that he started out alone, thinking always, as he went, how he should persuade Princess Goldilocks to marry the king. In his pocket he carried a writing tablet, and whenever a happy thought occurred to him, he dismounted from his horse and sat down under the trees to write it, so that he might be sure not to forget anything which might be of use in his speech to the princess. One morning, when he had started early, as he was crossing a great meadow, he had a capital idea. So he sprang from his horse and sat down under a willow tree by a little stream. When he had written it down, he began to look about him and admire the pretty place where he had stopped. Then he saw a great golden carp panting and gasping on the grass, and leaping after little flies it had jumped too far, and was lying on the bank almost dead. Charming was sorry for it, and though he might have carried it away for his dinner, he picked it up gently and put it back into the stream. It sank to the bottom, drinking in the cool, refreshing water, and then, swimming gaily up to the bank, it said, "Charming, I thank you for the kindness you have shown me. But for you I should have died. By this act you have saved my life. One day I will repay you." With these words it plunged into the water again, leaving Charming greatly surprised at its politeness. Another day, as he was going on his way, he saw a raven in great distress. The poor bird was being pursued by a great eagle. It would soon have been caught and eaten up, had not Charming quickly taken his bow and arrow and shot the eagle dead. The raven perched joyfully on a tree. "Charming," said he, "it was very generous of you to come to the aid of a poor raven. I shall not be ungrateful. Some day I will repay you." Charming thought this was very kind of the raven, and he went on his way. Before sunrise one morning, when it was so dark that he could hardly see his way, he heard an owl crying out as though it were in distress. "Hark," he said, "that owl seems to be in great trouble. It must be caught in a snare." So he began to hunt about, and soon found a great net spread by some fowlers. What a pity it is that men do nothing but torment and persecute poor creatures that never do them any harm, he said, and taking out his knife, he cut the cords. The owl flitted away, but came back quickly and said, "Charming, I need not tell you what a great service you have done me. At daybreak the fowlers would have come and caught me. Without your help I should have been killed. I am grateful, and one day I will repay you." These were the 3 chief adventures that happened to Charming on his journey. He made all possible speed to reach the palace of fair Goldilocks. When he arrived there, he dressed himself with the greatest care in a suit of rich brocade, and put on a hat with scarlet and white plumes. Over his shoulder he threw an embroidered scarf. He carried on his arm a little basket in which was a pretty little dog that he had bought on the way. He looked so handsome and gay when he presented himself at the palace gate that the guards paid him great respect, and sent in haste to announce to Princess Goldilocks that Charming, an ambassador of her neighbor the king, desired to see her. "Charming," repeated the princess. "The name promises well. I am sure that he is handsome, and that everyone likes him." "Indeed, that is true," said all her maids of honor at once. "We saw him from the window of the garret where we were spinning flax, and we could do nothing but look at him as long as he was in sight." "So that's the way you spend your time, is it?" replied the princess, "gazing out of the window at handsome strangers? Go quickly and get me my blue satin embroidered dress. Let one of you comb my hair, and another make me fresh garlands of flowers. Get me my high-heeled shoes and my fan, and tell them to sweep my hall and my throne. I want him to find me, in truth, fair Goldilocks." All the maidens rushed this way and that to make the princess ready. They were in such a hurry that they ran into and hindered one another. However, at last the princess passed into her gallery of mirrors to make sure that everything was as it should be. Then she mounted her throne of gold and ebony and ivory, and told her ladies to take their guitars and to play and sing softly. Charming was led to the audience room, and stood so dazzled with admiration that at first he could not speak. Presently he took courage, and delivered his speech, eloquently pleading with the princess to spare him the unhappiness of returning without her. "Sir Charming," answered she, "all the reasons which you have given me are very good, and I assure you I should take more pleasure in obliging you than in obliging anyone else. But you must know that a month ago, as I was walking by the river with my ladies, I took off my glove, and as I did so a ring slipped from my finger and rolled into the river. This ring was more precious to me than my kingdom, and you may imagine how distressed I was to lose it. I vowed then never to listen to any proposal of marriage unless the ambassador first brought me back my ring. So now you see what you have before you. For if you talk to me for 15 days and 15 nights, you could not make me change my mind." Charming was very much surprised by this answer, but he bowed low to the princess and begged her to accept the embroidered scarf and the little dog he had brought with him. But she said she did not wish any presents, and bade him think of what she had just told him. When he got back to his room, he went to bed without eating any supper, and his little dog, who was called Frolic, would not eat any either, but came and lay down beside him. All night long Charming tossed back and forth, sighing. "How am I to find a ring that fell into the river a month ago?" he said. "It is useless to try. She has chosen to set me a task which she knows will be impossible." And he sighed again. Frolic heard him and said, "My dear master, do not despair. You are always lucky, you know, and besides, you are too good not to be happy. Let us go down to the river as soon as it is day." Charming only petted the dog a little and said nothing, but after a while he fell asleep. At dawn, Frolic began to jump about and awoke his master. They went down to the river together and wandered up and down. Charming was thinking sadly of starting for home when he heard someone calling, "Charming, Charming." He looked all about, and thought he must be dreaming, for he could not see anybody. He walked on, and again the voice called, "Charming, Charming." "Who is calling me?" he said. Frolic, who was running along close to the water's edge, cried out, "All that I can see is a golden carp." And there, to be sure, was the great carp, and it spoke to Charming, saying, "You saved my life in the meadow by the willow tree, and I promise to repay you. See, dear Charming, here is Princess Goldilocks' ring." Charming stooped down and took the ring from the carp's mouth, thanking it over and over again. Then he and little Frolic went straight to the palace. Someone told the princess that he was asking to see her. "Ah, poor boy," she said. "He has come to say goodbye. He has doubtless decided that it is impossible to do what I asked." But in came Charming, and presented the ring to her, saying, "Princess, I have done your bidding. Will it please you to accept the king, my master, as your husband?" When the princess saw her ring brought back to her unhurt, she was so astonished that she thought she must be dreaming. "Surely, Sir Charming," she said, "you must be the favorite of some fairy, or you could never have found it." "Madam," he replied, "I know no fairy, but I had a great desire to obey your wishes." "Then, since you are so willing," said she, "you must do me another service. Otherwise I will never marry. Not far from here there is a prince called Galifron, who is determined to marry me. When I refused, he uttered most terrible threats that he would lay waste to my kingdom. But how could I accept him? He is a giant, taller than a tower, and thinks no more of eating a man than a monkey does of eating chestnuts. He talks so loud that those who are near him become deaf. I told him I did not wish to marry, but he has never ceased to persecute me and to kill my subjects. So before I listen to your proposal, you must kill him and bring me his head." Charming was somewhat startled by this proposal, but he answered, "Very well, Princess Goldilocks. I will fight this Galifron. I believe I shall be beaten, but I will die a brave man." The princess was frightened at this. She told Charming everything she could think of to prevent him from undertaking the adventure, but it was all in vain. He withdrew to arm himself properly, and then, taking little Frolic with him, he mounted his horse and set out for Galifron's country. Everyone he met told him what a terrible giant Galifron was, and how nobody dared to go near him. The more he heard about him, the more frightened he became. Frolic tried to encourage him by saying, "Dear master, while you are fighting the giant, I will go at him and bite his legs. Then when he stoops down to drive me off, you can kill him." Charming admired the little dog's spirit, but knew his help would not amount to much. At last he drew near to the giant's castle. All roads leading to it were covered with bones of men the giant had killed. Before long he saw Galifron coming through the wood. His head was higher than the tallest trees, and he was striding along, singing in a terrible voice, "Bring out the children for me to eat. They are the nicest kind of meat. The more you bring, the better 'twill be, for all in the world would not satisfy me." Then Charming began to sing the same tune. "Come and look upon bold Charming. He does not think you are very alarming. Although he is not as big as you, he's come a giant to subdue." When Galifron heard these words, he looked all around and soon caught sight of Charming, standing sword in hand. He flew into a terrible rage and aimed a blow at Charming with his heavy iron club, which would certainly have killed him if it had hit him. But at that moment, a raven perched on the giant's head and pecked out both his eyes. The giant struck out blindly in every direction, but Charming easily avoided his blows and wounded him so severely with his sword that he fell to the ground. Then he cut off the giant's head, while the raven, who was perched on a tree nearby, said, "You see, I have not forgotten the service you did me in killing the eagle. Today, I think I have fulfilled my promise to repay you." "It is I who am the debtor to you for your timely help," replied Charming, and I am very grateful to you." Then he mounted his horse and rode off with the head of Gallifron. When he came to the town, everyone ran after him, crying, "Here comes brave Charming! He has killed the giant!" The princess heard the shouts, but she did not dare to ask what had happened for fear she should be told that Charming had been killed. But soon Charming came in with the giant's head, the very sight of which frightened her, although she knew that Gallifron would never trouble her again. "Princess," said Charming, "I have killed your enemy. I hope you will no longer refuse the king, my master." "I must," said fair Goldilocks, "unless you can bring me some water from the Grotto of Darkness. This is a very deep cavern, about 6 leagues long. The entrance is guarded by 2 dragons with fire coming out of their eyes and mouths. When you get inside the gate, you go down into an immense hole full of toads and adders and snakes. At the bottom of this hole is a little cave, in which rises the fountain of beauty and health. It is some of this water that I must have. It has wonderful power for those who bathe in it. If you are beautiful, you will always remain so. If you are ugly, you become fair. If you are young, you never grow old. And if you are old, you become young. You see, Charming, that I really could not leave my kingdom without carrying some of this water with me." "Princess," he said, "you are so beautiful that you can never have any need of this water. But I am an unhappy ambassador whose death you desire. I will go in search of what you wish, though I know I shall never return." The princess showed no sign of taking back her request, so Charming set out with his little dog Frolic for the Grotto of Darkness. Everyone he met on the way said, "What a pity to see so handsome a youth throwing away his life so recklessly. He is going to the grotto alone, but if he had 100 men with him, he could never succeed. Why does the princess demand such impossible things?" He seemed to pay no attention to them and went right along, but he was very sad at heart. At last he came to the top of a mountain from which he had been told one could see the Grotto of Darkness, and he looked about to find it. He saw a hideous rock, black as ink, out of which a thick smoke was coming. In a moment, one of the fiery dragons appeared. Its body was yellow and green. It had great claws and a long tail that lay in 100 coils. Fire was shooting out from its mouth and eyes. When Frolic saw the dragon, he was so frightened that he did not know where to hide. Charming, who was resolved to die in the attempt if need be, drew his sword and took out the flask which Princess Goldilocks had given him to fill with the water of beauty. As he started for the cavern, he said to Frolic, "I feel sure that I shall die in the attempt to get this water. When I do not come back to you, go and tell the princess that I have died in the effort to fulfill her wishes. Then go to the king, my master, and tell him of my adventures." As he was speaking, he heard a voice calling, "Charming, Charming." "Who calls me?" he said. Then he noticed an owl sitting in a hollow tree, who said to him, "You saved my life when I was in the net, and I promised to repay you. Now I can do it. Give me your flask. I know all the paths through the Grotto of Darkness, and I will fetch the water of beauty for you." Charming was delighted to give him the flask, and the owl flew into the cavern without any difficulty, and in less than a quarter of an hour returned with the flask full to the brim. Charming thanked him with all his heart and joyfully set out for the town. He went straight to the palace and presented the flask to Princess Goldilocks, who had nothing more to say. She thanked Charming and ordered that preparations should be made for her departure, and they soon set out together. The princess found Charming so delightful a companion that she sometimes said to him, "Why did we ever leave my kingdom? I could have made you king, and we should have been happy together." Charming answered, "I could not have done anything so displeasing to my master for all the kingdoms of the earth, though I think you lovelier than the sun." At last they reached the king's chief city, and he came out to meet Princess Goldilocks, bringing magnificent presents. The marriage was celebrated with great rejoicings, but Goldilocks was so fond of Charming that she could not be happy unless he was near her. and his praises were always on her lips. If it had not been for Charming, she would say to the king, I should never have been here. You ought to be very grateful to him, for he did most impossible things to win me. Besides, he got me water from the fountain of beauty, so that I can never grow old, but shall be beautiful always. Then Charming's enemies, who envied him his good fortune, said to the king, You don't seem to be jealous, but you have good reason to be. The queen seems to talk and think of no one but Charming and how much he did to gain her, as if anybody you had sent could not have done just as much. Now I come to think of it, I believe you are right, said the king. Let him be chained hand and foot and thrown into the tower. So they took Charming, and as a reward for having served the king so well, he was shut up in the tower, where he saw no one but the jailer who brought him black bread and water once a day. But little Frolic stayed to comfort him, and brought him all the news. When Goldilocks heard of Charming's disgrace, she threw herself at the king's feet, and begged him to set Charming free. But the more she wept and pleaded, the more angry the king became, thinking that she loved Charming. At last she saw that it was of no use to plead any more, but she was very sad. The king took it into his head that perhaps she did not think him handsome enough. So he thought he would bathe his face with the water from the fountain of beauty, which was in a flask on a shelf in the queen's room. She had put it there so that she might look at it often. Now it happened that one of the housemaids, in chasing a spider, had knocked the flask off the shelf. It had broken, and all the water had been spilled. She swept up the pieces in great haste, and was at her wit's end what to do, when she remembered that she had seen in the king's room a flask just like this, filled with clear water. Without saying a word to anyone, she fetched that and placed it on the queen's shelf. Now the liquid in the king's flask was what was used in the kingdom for getting rid of unruly nobles. Instead of having their heads cut off, these nobles had their faces bathed with this water, and they fell asleep and never woke up. So one evening the king, thinking to make himself handsome, took the flask and bathed his face in the water. Then he fell asleep and never woke up again. Little Frolic was the first to find out what had happened, and he ran to tell Charming, who told him to go to Princess Goldilocks and beg her not to forget the poor prisoner. All the court was in great confusion because of the king's death, but Frolic made his way through the crowd and said to the queen, Madam, do not forget poor Charming. She remembered all he had done and suffered for her, and without saying a word to anyone, she went straight to the tower, and with her own hands took off Charming's chains. Then, placing a crown upon his head and the royal mantle on his shoulders, she said, Come, dear Charming, I make you king, and take you for my husband. Charming threw himself at her feet and thanked her. Everyone was delighted that he should be king. The wedding, which took place at once, was the prettiest ever seen, and Prince Charming and Princess Goldilocks lived happily ever after. This is the end of Fair Goldilocks by Madame d'Aulnoy, read by AnonJr. The Fish in the Ring by William Henderson. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Once upon a time, there was a mighty baron in the North Country who was a great magician that knew everything that would come to pass. So one day, when his little boy was 4 years old, he looked into the book of fate to see what would happen to him, and to his dismay, he found that his son would wed a lowly maid that had just been born in a house under the shadow of York Minster. Now the baron knew the father of the little girl was very, very poor, and he had 5 children already. So he called for his horse and rode into York, and passed by the father's house, and saw him sitting by the door, sad and doleful. So he dismounted and went to him and said, What is the matter, my good man? And the man said, Well, your honor, the fact is I've 5 children already, and now a 6th come. a little lass, and where to get the bread from to fill their mouths. That's more than I can say." "Don't be downhearted, my man," said the Baron. "If that's your trouble, I can help you. I'll take away the last little one, and you won't have to bother about her." "Thank you kindly, sir," said the man, and he went in and brought out the lass and gave her to the Baron, who mounted his horse and rode away with her. And when he got by the bank of the river Ouse, he threw the little thing into the river and rode off to his castle. But the little lass didn't sink. Her clothes kept her up for a time, and she floated, till she was cast ashore just in front of a fisherman's hut. There the fisherman found her, and took pity on the poor little thing, and took her into his house, and she lived there till she was 15 years old, and a fine, handsome girl. One day it happened that the Baron went out hunting with some companions along the banks of the river Ouse, and stopped at the fisherman's hut to get a drink, and the girl came out to give it to them. They all noticed her beauty, and one of them said to the Baron, "You can read fates, Baron. Whom will she marry, do you think?" "Oh, that's easy to guess," said the Baron. "Some yokel or other, but I'll cast her horoscope. Come here, girl, and tell me on what day you were born." "I don't know, sir," said the girl. "I was picked up just here after having been brought down by the river about 15 years ago." Then the Baron knew who she was, and when they went away, he rode back and said to the girl, "Hark ye, girl, I will make your fortune. Take this letter to my brother in Scarborough, and you'll be settled for life." And the girl took the letter and said she would go. Now this was what he had written in the letter. "Dear brother, take the bearer and put her to death immediately. Yours affectionately, Albert." So soon after, the girl set out for Scarborough and slept for the night at a little inn. Now that very night a band of robbers broke into the inn and searched the girl, who had no money and only the letter. So they opened this and read it, and thought it a shame. The captain of the robbers took a pen and paper and wrote this letter: "Dear brother, take the bearer and marry her to my son immediately. Yours affectionately, Albert." And then he gave it to the girl, bidding her begone. So she went on to the Baron's brother at Scarborough, a noble knight with whom the Baron's son was staying. When she gave the letter to his brother, he gave orders for the wedding to be prepared at once, and they were married that very day. Soon after, the Baron himself came to his brother's castle, and what was his surprise to find that the very thing he had plotted against had come to pass. But he was not to be put off that way. He took out the girl for a walk, as he said, along the cliffs, and when he got her all alone, he took her by the arms and was going to throw her over. But she begged hard for her life. "I have not done anything," she said. "If you will only spare me, I will do whatever you wish. I will never see you or your son again till you desire it." Then the Baron took off his gold ring and threw it into the sea, saying, "Never let me see your face till you can show me that ring," and he let her go. The poor girl wandered on, till at last she came to a great noble's castle, and she asked to have some work given to her, and they made her the scullion girl of the castle, for she had been used to such work in the fisherman's hut. Now one day, who should she see coming up to the noble's house but the Baron and his brother and his son, her husband? She didn't know what to do, but thought they would not see her in the castle kitchen. So she went back to her work with a sigh and set to cleaning a huge big fish that was to be boiled for their dinner. And as she was cleaning it, she saw something shine inside it. And what do you think she found? Why, there was the Baron's ring, the very one he had thrown over the cliff at Scarborough. She was right glad to see it, you may be sure. Then she cooked the fish as nicely as she could and served it up. Well, when the fish came on the table, the guests liked it so well that they asked the noble who cooked it. He said he didn't know, but called to his servants, "Ho there, send up the cook that cooked that fine fish." So they went down to the kitchen and told the girl she was wanted in the hall. Then she washed and tidied herself and put the Baron's gold ring on her thumb and went up into the hall. When the banqueters saw such a young and beautiful cook, they were surprised. But the Baron was in a tower of a temper, and started up as if he would do her some violence. So the girl went up to him with her hand before her with the ring on it, and she put it down before him on the table. Then at last the Baron saw that no one could fight against fate, and he handed her to a seat and announced to all the company that this was his son's true wife. And he took her and his son home to his castle, and they all lived as happy as could be ever afterwards. This is the end of The Fish in the Ring by William Henderson. Read by AnonJr.
Little Red Riding Hood by Brothers Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. There was once a sweet little maid who lived with her father and mother in a pretty little cottage at the end of the village. At the further end of the wood was another pretty cottage, and in it lived her grandmother. Everybody loved this little girl. Her grandmother perhaps loved her most of all and gave her a great many pretty things. Once she gave her a red cloak with a hood which she always wore. So people called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, Little Red Riding Hood's mother said, "Put on your things and go to your grandmother. She has been ill. Take along this basket for her. I have put in it eggs, butter, and cake, and other dainties." It was a bright and sunny morning. Red Riding Hood was so happy that at first she wanted to dance through the wood. All around her grew pretty wildflowers which she loved so well, and she stopped to pick a bunch for her grandmother. Little Red Riding Hood wandered from her path and was stopping to pick a flower when from behind her a gruff voice said, "Good morning, Little Red Riding Hood." Little Red Riding Hood turned around and saw a great big wolf. But Little Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked beast the wolf was, so she was not afraid. "What have you in the basket, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Eggs and butter and cake, Mr. Wolf." "Where are you going with them, Little Red Riding Hood?" "I am going to my grandmother, who is ill, Mr. Wolf." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "Along that path, past the wild rose bushes, then through the gate at the end of the wood, Mr. Wolf." Then Mr. Wolf again said, "Good morning," and set off. And Little Red Riding Hood again went in search of wildflowers. At last he reached the porch covered with flowers and knocked at the door of the cottage. "Who is there?" called the grandmother. "Little Red Riding Hood," said the wicked wolf. "Press the latch, open the door, and walk in," said the grandmother. The wolf pressed the latch and walked in where the grandmother lay in bed. He made one jump at her, but she jumped out of bed into a closet. Then the wolf put on the cap which she had dropped and crept under the bedclothes. In a short while, Little Red Riding Hood knocked at the door and walked in, saying, "Good morning, grandmother. I have brought you eggs, butter, and cake, and here is a bunch of flowers I gathered in the wood. As she came nearer the bed, she said, "What big ears you have, grandmother!" "All the better to hear you with, my dear." "What big eyes you have, grandmother!" "All the better to see you with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what a big nose you have!" "All the better to smell with, my dear." "But, grandmother, what a big mouth you have!" "All the better to eat you up with, my dear," he said, and he sprang at Little Red Riding Hood. Just at that moment, Little Red Riding Hood's father was passing the cottage and heard her scream. He rushed in and, with his axe, chopped off Mr. Wolf's head. Everybody was happy that Little Red Riding Hood had escaped the wolf. Then Little Red Riding Hood's father carried her home and they lived happily ever after. End of Little Red Riding Hood by Brothers Grimm.
Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There were once a man and a woman who had long in vain wished for a child. At length the woman hoped that God was about to grant her desire. These people had a little window in the back of their house, from which a splendid garden could be seen, which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. It was, however, surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared go into it because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by this window and looking down into the garden when she saw a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, Rapunzel, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. She quite pined away and began to look pale and miserable. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What ails you, dear wife?" "Ah," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man, who loved her, thought, "Sooner than let your wife die, bring her some of the rampion yourself, let it cost what it will." At twilight he clambered down over the wall and into the garden of the enchantress, hastily clutched a handful of rampion, and took it to his wife. She at once made herself a salad of it and ate it greedily. It tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it 3 times as much as before. If he was to have any rest, her husband must once more descend into the garden. In the gloom of the evening, therefore, he let himself down again, but when he had clambered down the wall he was terribly afraid, for he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How can you dare," she said with an angry look, "descend into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Ah," answered he, "let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your rampion from the window, and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat." Then the enchantress allowed her anger to be softened, and said to him, "If the case be as you say, I will allow you to take away with you as much rampion as you will, only I make one condition. You must bring me the child your wife will bring into the world. It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother." The man in his terror consented to everything, and when the woman was brought to bed, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress shut her into a tower, which lay in the forest, and had neither stairs nor door, but at quite the top there was a little window. When the enchantress wanted to go in, she placed herself beneath it and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, fine as spun gold, and when she heard the voice of the enchantress, she unfastened her braided tresses, wound them around one of the hooks of the window above, and then the hair fell 20 ells down, and the enchantress climbed up by it. After a year or two it came to pass that the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then he heard a song which was so charming that he stood still and listened. This was Rapunzel, who in her solitude passed her time letting her sweet voice resound. The king's son wanted to climb up to her, and looked for the door of the tower, but none was to be found. He rode home, but the singing had so deeply touched his heart that every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once when he was thus standing behind a tree, he saw that an enchantress came there, and heard how she cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is the ladder by which one mounts, I too will try my fortune," said he. And the next day when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Immediately the hair fell down, and the king's son climbed up. At first Rapunzel was terribly frightened, when a man, such as her eyes had never yet beheld, came to her, but the king's son began to talk to her quite like a friend, and told her that his heart had been so stirred that it had let him have no rest, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel lost her fear, and when he asked her if she would take him for her husband, and she saw that he was young and handsome, she thought, "He will love me more than old Dame Gothel does." And she said yes, and laid her hand in his. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it. And when that is ready I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." They agreed that until that time he should come to her every evening, for the old woman came by day. The enchantress remarked nothing of this until once Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, Dame Gothel, how it happens that you are so much heavier for me to draw up than the young king's son. He is with me in a moment." "Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." In her anger she clutched Rapunzel's beautiful tresses, wrapped them twice round her left hand, seized a pair of scissors with the right, and snip, snip, they were cut off, and the lovely braids lay on the ground, and she was so pitiless that she took poor Rapunzel into a desert where she had to live in great grief and misery. On the same day that she cast out Rapunzel, however, the enchantress fastened the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook on the window, and when the king's son came and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me," she let the hair down. The king's son ascended, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who gazed at him with wicked and venomous looks. "Aha!" she cried mockingly. "You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer singing in the nest, and the cat has got it and will scratch out your eyes as well. Rapunzel is lost to you. You will never see her again." The king's son was beside himself with pain, and in his despair he leapt down from the tower. He escaped with his life, but the thorns into which he fell pierced his eyes. Then he wandered quite blind around the forest, ate nothing but roots and berries, and did naught but lament and weep over the loss of his dearest wife. Thus he roamed about in misery for some years, and at length came to the desert where Rapunzel, with the twins to which she had given birth, a boy and a girl, lived in wretchedness. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it, and when he approached, Rapunzel knew him and fell on his neck and wept. 2 of her tears wetted his eyes, and they grew clear again, and he could see with them as before. He led her into his kingdom, where he was joyfully received, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. End of Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. Read by Kylie 6Q. Rumpelstiltskin by the Brothers Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. By the side of the wood, in a country a long way off, ran a fine stream of water, and upon the stream there stood a mill. The miller's house was close by, and the miller, you must know, had a very beautiful daughter. She was, moreover, very shrewd and clever, and the miller was so proud of her that he one day told the king of the land, who used to come and hunt in the wood, that his daughter could spin gold out of straw. Now this king was very fond of money, and when he heard the miller's boast, his greediness was raised, and he sent for the girl to be brought before him. Then he led her to a chamber in his palace, where there was a great heap of straw, and gave her a spinning wheel, and said, "All this must be spun into gold before the morning, as you love your life." It was in vain that the poor maiden said that it was only a silly boast of her father, for that she could do no such thing as spin straw into gold. The chamber door was locked, and she was left alone. She sat down in one corner of the room and began to bewail her hard fate, when on a sudden the door opened, and a droll-looking little man hobbled in, and said, "Good morrow to you, my good lass. What are you weeping for?" "Alas," said she, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I know not how." "What will you give me," said the hobgoblin, "to do it for you?" "My necklace," replied the maiden. He took her at her word, and sat himself down on the wheel, and whistled and sang, round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold. And round about the wheel went merrily, and the work was quickly done, and the straw was all spun into gold. When the king came and saw this, he was greatly astonished and pleased, but his heart grew still more greedy of gain, and he shut up the poor miller's daughter again with a fresh task. Then she knew not what to do, and she sat down once more to weep, but the dwarf soon opened the door and said, "What will you give me to do your task?" "The ring on my finger," said she. So her little friend took the ring and began to work at the wheel again, and whistled and sang, round about, lo and behold, reel away, straw into gold. Till long before morning all was done again. The king was greatly delighted to see all this glittering treasure, but he had still not enough. So he took the miller's daughter to yet a larger heap, and said, "All must be spun tonight, and if it is, you shall be my queen." As soon as she was alone, the dwarf came in and said, "What will you give me to spin gold for you this third time?" "I have nothing left," said she. "Then say you will give me," said the little man, "the first little child that you may ever have when you are queen." "That may never be," thought the miller's daughter, and as she knew no other way to get her task done, she said that she would do what he asked. Round went the wheel again to the old song, and the mannikin once more spun the heap into gold. The king came in the morning, and, finding all he wanted, was forced to keep his word. So he married the miller's daughter, and she really became queen. At the birth of her first little child she was very glad, and forgot the dwarf and what she had said. But one day he came into her room, where she was sitting playing with her baby, and put her in mind of it. Then she grieved sorely at her misfortune, and said she would give him all the wealth of the kingdom if he would let her off, but in vain, till at last her tears softened him, and he said, "I will give you 3 days' grace, and if during that time you tell me my name, you shall keep your child." Now the queen lay awake all night, thinking of all the odd names that she had ever heard, and she sent messengers all over the land to find out new ones. The next day the little man came, and she began with Timothy, Ichabod, Benjamin, Jeremiah, and all the names she could remember. But to all and each of them he said, "Madam, that is not my name." The second day she began with all the comical names she could hear of, Bandy-legs, Hunchback, Crookshanks, and so on, but the little gentleman said to every one of them, "Madam, that is not my name." The third day one of the messengers came back and said, "I have traveled 2 days without hearing of any other names, but yesterday as I was climbing a high hill among the trees of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, I saw a little hut, and before the hut burnt a fire, and round about the fire a funny little dwarf was dancing upon one leg, singing, 'Merrily the feast I'll make, today I'll brew, tomorrow bake. Merrily I'll dance and sing, for next day will a stranger bring. Little does my lady dream, Rumpelstiltskin is my name.'" When the queen heard this she jumped for joy, and as soon as her little friend came, she sat down upon her throne and called all her court round to enjoy the fun, and the nurse stood by her side with the baby in her arms, as if it was quite ready to be given up. Then the little man began to chuckle at the thought of having the poor child to take home with him to his hut in the woods, and he cried out, "Now, lady, what is my name?" "Is it John?" asked she. "No, madam." "Is it Tom?" asked she. "No, madam." "Is it Jimmy?" "It is not." "Can your name be Rumpelstiltskin?" said the lady slyly. "Some witch told you that! Some witch told you that!" cried the little man, and dashed his right foot in rage so deep into the floor he was forced to lay hold of it with both hands to pull it out. When he made the best of his way off, while the nurse laughed and the baby crowed, and all the court jeered at him for having so much trouble for nothing, and said, "We wish you a very good morning and a merry feast, Mr. Rumpelstiltskin." End of Rumpelstiltskin by the Brothers Grimm. Read by Kylie 6Q.
Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alexandria Adair. Camarillo, California, April 2026. Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. The Runaways. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. It was after we had had the measles, that fell and blighting disorder which we got from Alice picking up 5 deeply infected shillings that a bemeasled family had wrapped in a bit of paper to pay the doctor with, and then carelessly dropped in the street. Alice held the packet hotly in her muff all through a charity concert. Hence these tears, as it says in Virgil. And if you have ever had measles, you will know that this is not what is called figuring speech, because your eyes do run like mad all the time. When we were unmeasled again, we were sent to stay at Lim Church with a Miss Sandal, and her motto was plain living and high thinking. She had a brother, and his motto was the same, and it was his charity concert that Alice held the fatal shilling in her muff throughout of. Later on, he was giving tracts to a bricklayer, and fell off a scaffold in his giddy earnestness, and Miss Sandal had to go and nurse him. So the 6 of us stayed in the plain living high thinking house by ourselves, and old Mrs. Beale from the village came in every day and did the housework. She was of humble birth, but a true lady in minding her own affairs, which is what a great many ladies do not know how to do at all. We had no lessons to do, and were thus free to attend to any adventures which came along. Adventures are the real business of life. The rest is only in-betweenness, what Albert's uncle calls padding. He's an author. Miss Sandal's house was very plain and clean, with lots of white paint, and very difficult to play in. So we were out a good deal. It was seaside, so of course there was the beach, and besides that the marsh, big green fields with sheep all about, and wet dikes with sedge growing, and mud, and eels in the mud, and winding white roads that all looked the same, and all very interesting, as though they might lead to almost anything you didn't expect. Really, of course, they led to Ashford and Romney and Ivy Church and real-life places like that, but they don't look it. The day when what I am going to tell you about happened, we were all leaning on the stone wall looking at the pigs. The pig man is a great friend of ours, all except H.O., who is my youngest brother. His name is Horace Octavius, and if you want to know why we called him H.O., you'd better read The Treasure Seekers and find out. He had gone to tea with a schoolmaster's son. A hateful kid.
"Isn't that the boy you're always fighting?"
Dora asked when H.O. said he was going. "Yes," said H.O., "but then he keeps rabbits." So then we understood and let him go. While the rest of us were gazing fondly on the pigs, and 2 soldiers came by. We asked them where they were off to. They told us to mind our own business, which is not manners, even if you are a soldier on private affairs. "Oh, all right," said Oswald, who was the eldest, and he advised the soldiers to keep their hair on. The little they had was cut very short. "I expect they're scouts or something," said Dickie. "It's a field day, or a sham fight, or something, as likely as not." "Let's go after them and see," said Oswald, ever prompt in his decidings. So we did. We ran a bit at first so as to not let the soldiers have too much of a lead. Their red coats made it quite easy to keep them in sight on the winding white marsh road. But we did not catch them up. They seemed to go faster and faster. So we ran a little bit more every now and then, and we went quite a long way after them. But they didn't meet any of their officers or regiments or things, and we began to think that perchance we were engaged in the disheartening chase of the wild goose. This has sometimes occurred. There was a ruined church about 2 miles from Lymchurch, and when we got close to that, we lost sight of the redcoats. So we stopped on the little bridge that is near there to reconnoiter. The soldiers had vanished. "Well, here's a go," said Dickie. "It is a wild goose chase," said Noel. "I shall make a piece of poetry about it. I shall call the title The Vanishing Reeds, or The Soldiers That Were Not When You Got There." "You shut up," said Oswald, whose eagle eye had caught a glimpse of scarlet through the arch of the ruin. None of the others had seen this. Perhaps you will think I do not say enough about Oswald's quickness of sight, so I had better tell you that it's only because Oswald is me, and very modest. At least he tries to be, only because he knows it is what a true gentleman ought to. There in the ruins, he went on, I expect they're going to have an easy and a pipe out of the wind. I think it's very mysterious, said Noel. I shouldn't wonder if they're going to dig for buried treasure. Let's go and see. No, said Oswald, who, though modest, is thoughtful. If we do, they'll stop digging, or whatever they're doing. When they've gone away, we'll go and see if the ground is scratched about. So we delayed where we were, but we saw no more Scarlet. In a little while, a dull-looking man in brown came by on a bicycle. He stopped and got off. Seen a couple of Tommies about here, my lad, he said to Oswald. Oswald does not like being called anybody's lad, especially by that kind of man's. But he did not want to spoil the review, or field day, or sham fight, or whatever it might be, so he said, Yes, they're up in the ruins. You don't say so, said the man. In uniform, I suppose? Yes, of course, or you wouldn't have known they were soldiers. Silly cuckoos. He wheeled his bicycle up the rough lane that leads to the old ruin. It can't be buried treasure, said Dickie. I don't care if it is, said Oswald. We'll see what's happening. I don't mind spoiling his sport. Mind ladding me like that. So we followed the man with the bicycle. He was leaning against the churchyard gate when we got there. The man off it was going up to the ruin, and we went after him. He did not call out to the soldiers, and we thought that odd. But it didn't make us think where it might have made us if we had had any sense. He just went creeping about, looking behind walls and inside arches, as though he were playing at hide-and-seek. There is a mound in the middle of the ruin, where stones and things had fallen during dark ages, and the grass has grown all over them. We stood on the mound and watched the bicycling stranger nosing about like a ferret. There is an archway in that ruin, and a flight of steps goes down. Only 5 steps, and then it is all stopped up with fallen stones and earth. The stranger stopped at last at this arch, and stooped forward with his hands on his knees and looked through the arch and down the steps. Then he said, suddenly and fiercely, Come out of it, will you? And the soldiers came. I wouldn't have. They were 2 to his 1. They came out cringing like beaten dogs. The brown man made a sort of bound, and the next minute those 2 soldiers were handcuffed together, and he was driving them before him like sheep. Back you go the same way as what you come, he said. And then Oswald saw the soldiers' faces, and he will never forget what they looked like. He jumped off the mound and ran to where they were. What have they done? He asked the handcuffer. Deserters, said the man. Thanks to you, my lad. I got 'em as easy as kiss your hand. Then one of the soldiers looked at Oswald. He was not very old, about as big as a 5th form boy, and Oswald answered what the soldier looked at him. I'm not a sneak, he said. I wouldn't have told if I'd known. If you'd told me instead of saying to mind my own business, I'd have helped you. The soldier didn't answer, but the bicycle man did. Then you'd have helped yourself into the stone jug, my lad, said he. Help a dirty deserter. You're young enough to know better. Come along, you rubbish. And they went. When they were gone, Dickie said, It's very rum. I hate cowards, and deserters are cowards. I don't see why we feel like this. Alice and Dora and Noel were now discovered to be in tears. Of course we did right to tell, only when the soldier looked at me, said Oswald. Yes, said Dickie. That's just it. In the deepest gloom, the party retraced its steps. As we went, Dora said with sniffs, I suppose it was the bicycle man's duty. Of course, said Oswald. But it wasn't our duty, and I jolly well wish we hadn't. And such a beautiful day, too, said Noel, sniffing in his turn. It was beautiful. The afternoon had been dull, but now the sun was shining flat across the marshes, making everything look as if it had been covered over with the best gold leaf, marsh and trees and roofs and stacks and everything. That evening Noel wrote a poem about it all. It began, Poor soldiers, why did you run away on such a beautiful, beautiful day? If you had run away in the rain, perhaps they would have never found you again, because then Oswald would not have been there to show the hunter the way to your lair. Oswald would have licked him for that. Only Noel is not very strong, and there is something about poets, however young, that makes it rather like licking a girl. So Oswald did not even say what he thought. Noel cries at the least thing. Oswald only said, Let's go down to our pig man. And we all went except Noel. He will never go anywhere when in the midst of making poetry. And Alice stayed with him, and H.O. was in bed. We told the pig man all about the deserters, and about our miserable inside remorsefulness, and he said he knew just how we felt. "There's quite enough again a poor chap that's made a bolt of it without the rest of us a-joining in," he said. "Not as I holds with desertin'. Mean trick, I call it. But all the same, when the odds is that heavy, thousands to one, all the army and the navy and the police and the parliament and the king again one poor silly bloke, you wouldn't have done it a purpose, I lay." "Not much," said Oswald in gloomy dejection. "Have a peppermint? They're extra strong." When the pig man had had one, he went on talking. "There's the young chap now," he said. "Broke out of Dover Gale. I happen to know what he's in for. Nicked a 4-pound cake he did off a counter at a pastry cook's. Jenner's it was, in the High Street. Part hunger, part playfulness. But even if I wasn't to know what he was like for, do you think I'd put the coppers on him? Not me. Give a fellow a chance is what I say. But don't you grizzle about them there Tommies. Perhaps it'll be the making of 'em in the end. Us alack-baked pears ever wore boots, I seed 'em. Only next time just you take and think afore you pipes up. See?" We said that we saw, and the next time we would do as he said, and then we went home again. As we went, Dora said,
"But supposing it was a cruel murderer that had got loose, you ought to tell then."
"Yes," said Dickie, "but before you do, you ought to be jolly sure it is a cruel murderer and not a chap that's taken a cake because he was hungry. How do you know what you'd do if you were hungry enough?"
"I shouldn't steal,"
said Dora. "I'm not so sure," said Dickie, and they argued about it all the way home. Before we got in, it began to rain in torrents. Conversations about food always make you feel as though it was a very long time since you had had anything to eat. Mrs. Beale had gone home, of course, but we went into the larder. It is a generous larder. No lock, only a big wooden latch that pulls up with a string, like in Red Riding Hood. And the floor is clean, damp red brick. It makes ginger nuts soft if you put the bag on the floor. There was half a rhubarb pie, and there were meat turnovers with potatoes in them. Mrs. Beale is a thoughtful person, and I know many people much richer that are not nearly so thoughtful. We had a comfortable feast at the kitchen table, standing up to eat like horses. Then we had to let Noel read us his piece of poetry about the soldier. He wouldn't have slept if we hadn't. It was very long, and it began, as I have said, and ended up, "Poor soldiers, learn a lesson from today. It is very wrong to run away. It is better to stay and serve your king and country. Hooray!" Noel owned that hooray sounded too cheerful for the end of a poem about soldiers with faces like theirs were. "But I didn't mean it about the soldiers. It was about the king and country. Have a sec." So he wrote, "P.S. I do not mean to be unkind, Polish soldiers, to you, so never mind. When I say hooray or sing, it is because I am thinking of my country and my king." "You can't sing hooray," said Dickie. So Noel went to bed singing it, which was better than arguing about it, Alice said. But it was noisier as well. Oswald and Dickie always went round the house to see that all the doors were bolted and the shutters up. This is what the head of the house always does, and Oswald is the head when father is not there. There are no shutters upstairs, only curtains. The White House, which is Miss Sandal's house's name, is not in the village, but quite a step from it, as Mrs. Beale says. It is the first house you come to as you come along the road from the marsh. We used to look in the cupboard and under the beds for burglars every night. The girls liked us too, though they wouldn't look themselves, and I don't know that it was much good. If there is a burglar, it's sometimes safer for you not to know it. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to find a burglar, especially as he would be armed to the teeth as likely as not. However, there's not much worth being a burglar about in houses where the motto is plain living and high thinking, and there was never anyone in the cupboards or under the beds. Then we all put out the lights very carefully in case of fire, all except Noel's. He doesn't like the dark. He says there are things in it that go away when you light a candle, and however much you talk reason and science to him, it makes no difference at all. Then we got into our pajamas. It was Oswald who asked father to let us have pajamas instead of nightgowns. They are so convenient for dressing up when you wish to act clowns, or West Indian planters, or any loose-clothed characters. Then we got into bed, and then we got to sleep. Little did the unconscious sleepers reck of the strange destiny that was advancing on them by leaps and bounds through the silent watches of the night. Although we were asleep, the rain went on raining just the same, and the wind blowing across the marsh with the fury of a maniac who has been transformed into blacksmith bellows. And through the night, and the wind and the rain, our dreadful destiny grew nearer and nearer. I wish this to sound as if something was going to happen, and I hope it does. I hope the reader's heart is now standing still with apprehensiousness on our account, but I do not want it to stop altogether. So I will tell you that we were not all going to be murdered in our beds, or pass peacefully away in our sleeps with angel-like smiles on our young and beautiful faces. Not at all. What really happened was this. Some time must have elapsed between our closing our eyes in serene slumber and the following narrative. Oswald was awakened by Dickie thumping him hard in the back and saying in accents of terror, At least he says not, but Oswald knows what they sounded like. "What's that?" Oswald reared up on his elbow and listened, but there was nothing to listen to except Dickie breathing like a grampus, and the giggle-guggle of the rainwater overflowing from the tub under the window. "What's that?" said Oswald. He did not speak furiously, as many elder brothers would have done when suddenly awakened by thumps. "That!" said Dickie. "There it is again!" And this time certainly there it was, and it sounded like somebody hammering on the front door with his fists. There is no knocker to the plain living, high-thinking house. Oswald controlled his fears, if he had any. I am not going to say whether he had or hadn't, and struck a match. Before the candle had had time to settle its flame after the first flare-up that doesn't last, the row began again. Oswald's nerves are of iron. But it would have given anybody a start to see two white figures in the doorway, yet so it was. They proved to be Alice and Dora in their 90s, but no one could blame anyone for not being sure of this at first. "Is it burglars?" said Dora, and her teeth did chatter, whatever she may say.
"I think it's Mrs. Beale," said Alice. "I expect she's forgotten the key."
Oswald pulled his watch out from under his pillow. "It's 1:30, he said, and then the knocking began again. So the intrepid Oswald went to the landing window that is over the front door. The others went too, and he opened the window in his pajamas and said, 'Who's there?' There was the scraping of boots on the doorstep as somebody down there stepped back. 'Is this the way to Ashford?' said the voice of a man. 'Ashford's 13 miles off,' said Oswald. 'You get onto the Dover Road.' 'I don't want to get onto the Dover Road,' said the voice. 'I've had enough of Dover.' A thrill ran through every heart. We all told each other so afterwards. 'Well,' said Dickie, 'Ashford's 13 miles. Anybody but you in the house?'
'Say we've got men, and dogs, and guns,'
whispered Dora. 'There are 6 of us,' said Oswald, 'all armed to the teeth.' The stranger laughed. 'I'm not a burglar,' he said. 'I've lost my way, that's all. I thought I should have got to Ashford before dusk, but I missed the way. I've been wandering all over these marshes ever since in the rain. I expect they're out after me now, but I'm dead beat. I can't go on. Won't you let me in? I can sit by the kitchen fire.' Oswald drew his head back through the window, and a hasty council took place on the landing.
"It is," said Alice. "You heard what he said about Dover, and their being out after him?"
"I say, you might let a chap in," said the voice outside. "I'm perfectly respectable. Upon my word, I am."
"I wish he hadn't said that," whispered Dora. "Such a dreadful story, and we didn't even ask him if he was." "He sounds very tired," said Alice.
"And wet," said Oswald. "I heard the water squelching in his boots." "What'll happen if we don't let him in?" said Dickie. "He'll be caught and taken back like the soldiers," said Oswald. "Look here, I'm going to chance it. You others can lock yourselves into your rooms if you're frightened." Then Oswald put his brave young head out the window, and the rain dripped onto the back of his bold young Ned off the roof, like a watering pot onto a beautiful flower, and he said, "There's a porch to the side door. Just scoot round there and shelter, and I'll come down in half a sec." A resolve made in early youth never to face midnight encounters without boots was the cause of this delay. Oswald and Dickie got into their boots and jackets, and told the girls to go back to bed. Then we went down and opened the front door. The stranger heard the bolts go, and he was outside waiting. We held the door open politely, and he stepped in and began at once to drip heavily on the doormat. We shut the door. He looked wildly around. "Be calm, you are safe," said Oswald. "Thanks," said the stranger. "I see I am." All our hearts were full of pity for the outcast. He was indeed a spectacle to shock the benevolent. Even the prison people, Oswald thought, or the man he took the cake from, would have felt their fierceness fade if they could have seen him then. He was not in prison dress. Oswald would have rather liked to see that, but he remembered it was safer for the man that he had found means to rid himself of the felon's garb. He wore a gray knickerbocker suit covered with mud. The lining of his hat must have been blue, and had run down his face in streaks like the gentleman in Mr. Kipling's story. He was wetter than I have ever seen anyone out of a bath or the sea. "Come into the kitchen," said Oswald. "You can drip there quite comfortably. The floor is brick." He followed us into the kitchen. "Are you kids alone in the house?" he said. "Yes," said Oswald. "Then I suppose it's no good asking if you got a drop of brandy." "Not a bit," said Dickie. "Whiskey would do, or gin, or any sort of spirit," said the smeared stranger, hopefully. Not a drop, said Oswald. At least, I'll look in the medicine cupboard, and I say, take off your things and put them in the sink. I'll get you some other clothes. There are some of Mr. Sandal's. The man hesitated. It'll make a better disguise, said Oswald in a low, significant whisper, and turned tactfully away, so as not to make the stranger feel awkward. Dickie got the clothes, and the stranger changed in the back kitchen. The only spirit Oswald could find was spirits of salts, which the stranger said was poison, and spirits of camphor. Oswald gave him some of this on sugar. He knows it is a good thing when you have taken cold. The stranger hated it. He changed in the back kitchen, and while he was doing it, we tried to light the kitchen fire, but it would not, so Dickie went up to ask Alex for some matches. And finding the girls had not gone to bed as ordered, but contrarily dressed themselves, he let them come down. And then, of course, there was no reason why they should not light the fire. They did. When the unfortunate one came out of the back kitchen, he looked quite a decent chap, though still blue in patches from the lining of his hat. Dickie whispered to me what a difference clothes made. He made a polite though jerky bow to the girls, and Dora said,
"How do you do? I hope you are quite well."
"As well as can be expected," replied the now tidy outcast, "considering what I've gone through."
"Tea or cocoa?"
said Dora.
"And do you like cheese or cold bacon best?"
"I'll leave it to you entirely," he answered, and he added without a pause, "I'm sure I can trust you."
"Indeed you can," said Dora earnestly. "You needn't be a bit afraid. You're perfectly safe with us."
He opened his eyes at this.
"He didn't expect such kindness," Alice whispered. "Poor man, he's quite overcome."
We gave him cocoa and cheese and bacon and butter and bread, and he ate a great deal with his feet in Mr. Sandal's all-wool boots on the kitchen fender. The girls wrung the water out of his clothes and hung them on the clothes horse on the other side of the fire. "I'm sure I'm very much obliged to you," he said. "Real charity I call this. I shan't forget, I assure you. I ought to apologize for knocking you up like this, but I've been hours tramping through this precious marsh of yours wet to the skin, and not a morsel of food since midday, and yours was the first light I'd seen for a couple of hours."
"I'm very glad it was us you knocked up,"
said Alice. "So am I," said he. "I might have knocked at a great many doors before I got such a welcome. I'm quite aware of that." He spoke all right, not like a laboring man, but it wasn't a gentleman's voice, and he seemed to end his sentences off short at the end, as though he had it on the tip of his tongue to say miss or sir. Oswald thought how terrible it must be out alone in the rain and the dark with the police after you, and no one to be kind to you if you knocked at their doors. "You must have had an awful day," he said. "I believe you," said the stranger, cutting himself more bacon. "Thank you, miss," he really did say at that time. "Just to have a cup if you don't mind, I believe you. I never want to have such a day again, I can tell you. I took one or two little things in the morning, but I wasn't in the mood or something. You know how it is sometimes."
"I can fancy it,"
said Alice. "And then the afternoon clouded over, and cleared up at sunset, you remember, but then it was too late, and the rain came on. Not half my word, I've been in a ditch. Thought my last hour had come, I tell you. Only got out by the skin of my teeth. Got rid of my whole outfit. There's a nice thing to happen to a young fellow. Upon my Sam, it's enough to make a chap swear he'll never take another thing as long as he lives."
"I hope you never will," said Dora earnestly. "It doesn't pay, you know."
"Upon my word, that's nearly true, though I don't know how you know," said the stranger, beginning on the cheese and pickles.
"I wish,"
Dora was beginning, but Oswald interrupted. He did not think it was fair to preach at the man. "So you lost your outfit in the ditch," he said. "How'd you get those clothes?" He pointed to the steaming gray suit. "Oh," replied the stranger, "the usual way." Oswald was too polite to ask what was the usual way of getting a gray suit to replace a prison outfit. He was afraid the usual way was the way the 4-pound cake had been got. Alice looked at me helplessly. I knew just how she felt. Harboring a criminal when people are out after him gives you a very chilly feeling in the waistcoat, or, if in pajamas, the part that the plaited cotton cord goes round. By the greatest good luck, there were a few of the extra strong peppermints left. We had 2 each and felt better. The girls put the sheets off Oswald's bed onto the bed Miss Sandal used to sleep in when not in London nursing the shattered bones of her tracked disturbing brother. "If you will go to bed now," Oswald said to the stranger, "we will wake you in good time, and you may sleep as sound as you like. We'll wake you all right." "You may wake me about 8, he said. "I ought to be getting on. I'm sure I don't know what to say in return for the very handsome reception you give me. Good night to you all, I'm sure."
"Good night," said everyone, and Dora added, "Don't you bother. While you're asleep, we'll think what's best to be done."
"Don't you bother," said the stranger, and he absently glanced at his own clothes. "What's big enough to get out of's big enough to get into." Then he took the candle, and Dickie showed him to his room.
"What's big enough to get out of?" repeated Alice. "Surely he doesn't mean to creep back into prison and pretend he was there all the time, only they didn't notice him?"
"Well, what are we to do?" asked Dickie, rejoining the rest of us. "He told me the dark room at Dover was a disgrace. Poor chap."
"We must invent a disguise," said Dora. "Let's pretend he's our aunt and dress him up, like in Hard Cash."
It was now 3 o'clock, but no one was sleepy. No one wanted to go to sleep at all, so we had taken our candles up into the attic and rummaged through Miss Sandal's trunks and found a complete disguise exactly suited to an aunt. We had everything: dress, cloak, bonnet, veil, gloves, petticoats, and even boots, though we knew all the time in our hearts that these were far too small. We put all ready on the parlor sofa, and then at last we began to feel in our eyes and ears and jaws how late it was, so we went back to bed. Alice said she knew how to wake exact to the minute, and we had known her to do it before, so we trusted her, and agreed that she was to wake us at 6. But alas, Alice had deemed herself cleverer than she was by long chalks, and it was not her that woke us. We were aroused from deep slumber by the voice of Mrs. Beale.
"Hi," it remarked. "Wake up, young gentleman. It's gone the 9:30, and your gentleman friend's up and dressed and a-waiting for his breakfast."
We sprang up. "I say, Mrs. Beale," cried Oswald, who never even in sleep quite loses his presence of mind, "don't let on to anyone that we've got a visitor." She went away laughing. I suppose she thought it was some silly play secret. She little knew. We found the stranger looking out of the window.
"I wouldn't do that," said Dora softly. "It isn't safe. Suppose someone saw you."
"Well," said he, "suppose they did?"
"They might take you, you know," said Dora. "It's done in a minute. We saw 2 poor men taken yesterday."
Her voice trembled at the gloomy recollection. "Let 'em take me," said the man who wore the clothes of the plain-living and high-thinking Mr. Sandal. "I don't mind, so long as my ugly mug don't break the camera."
"We want to save you,"
Dora was beginning, but Oswald, far-sighted beyond his years, felt a hot redness spread over his youthful ears and right down to his neck. He said, "Please, what were you doing in Dover, and what did you take yesterday?" "I was in Dover on business," said the man, "and what I took was Hythe Church and Burmish Church, and—" "Then you didn't steal a cake and get put into Dover Gale and break loose and—" said Dickie, though I kicked him as a sign not to. "Me?" said our friend. "Not exactly."
"Then what are you? If you're not that poor escaped thief, what are you?"
asked Dora fiercely, before Oswald could stop her. "I'm a photographer, miss," said he. "A traveling photographer." Then slowly but surely he saw it all, and I thought he would never have done laughing. "Breakfast is getting cold," said Oswald. "So it is," said our guest. "Lordy, what a go! This will be something to talk about between friends for many a year."
"No," said Alice suddenly. "We thought you were a runaway thief, and we wanted to help you whatever you were."
She pointed to the sofa, where the whole costume of the untrue aunt was lying in simple completeness.
"And you're honor bound never to tell a soul. Think," she added in persuading tones. "Think of the cold bacon and the cheese and all those pickles you had, and the fire and the cocoa and us being up all night, and the dry all-wool boots."
"Say no more, miss," said the photographer, for such indeed he was, nobly. "Your will is my law. I won't never breathe a word." And he sat down to the ham and eggs, as though it was weeks since he had tasted bacon. But we found out afterwards he went straight up to the ship and told everybody all about it. I wonder whether all photographers are dishonorable and ungrateful. Oswald hopes they are not, but he cannot feel at all sure. Lots of people chaffed us about it afterwards, but the pigman said we were jolly straight young Britons, and it is something to be called that by a man you really respect. It doesn't matter so much what the other people say, the people you don't really care about. When we told our Indian uncle about it, he said, "Nonsense, you ought never to try and shield a criminal." But that was not at all the way we felt about it at the time when the criminal was there, or we thought he was, all wet and hunted and miserable and with people out after him. He meant his friends who were expecting him, but we thought he meant police. It is very hard sometimes to know exactly what is right. If what feels right isn't right, how are you to know, I wonder? The only comforting thing about it all is that we heard next day that the soldiers had gotten away from the brown bicycle beast after all. I suppose it came home to them suddenly that they were 2-1, and they shoved him into a ditch and got away. They were never caught, I am very glad. And I suppose that's wrong too. So many things are. But I am. End of The Runaways.
The Seven Ravens by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There was once a man who had 7 sons, and last of all 1 daughter. Although the little girl was very pretty, she was so weak and small that they thought she could not live, but they said she should at once be christened. So the father sent one of his sons in haste to the spring to get some water, but the other 6 ran with him. Each wanted to be first at drawing the water, and so they were in such a hurry that all let their pitchers fall into the well, and they stood very foolishly looking at one another and did not know what to do, for none dared go home. In the meantime, the father was uneasy and could not tell what made the young men stay so long. "Surely," said he, "the whole 7 must have forgotten themselves over some game of play." And when he had waited still longer and they yet did not come, he flew into a rage and wished them all turned into ravens. Scarcely had he spoken these words when he heard a croaking over his head, and looked up and saw 7 ravens, as black as coal, flying round and round. Sorry as he was to see his wish so fulfilled, he did not know how what was done could be undone, and comforted himself as well as he could for the loss of his 7 sons with his dear little daughter, who soon became stronger and every day more beautiful. For a long time she did not know that she had ever had any brothers, for her father and mother took care not to speak of them before her. But one day, by chance, she heard the people about her speak of them. "Yes," said they, "she is beautiful indeed, but still, 'tis a pity that her brothers should have been lost for her sake." Then she was much grieved, and went to her father and mother and asked if she had any brothers, and what had become of them. So they dared no longer hide the truth from her, but said it was the will of heaven, and that her birth was only the innocent cause of it. But the little girl mourned sadly about it every day, and thought herself bound to do all she could to bring her brothers back. And she had neither rest nor ease, till at length one day she stole away, and set out into the wide world to find her brothers, wherever they might be, and free them, whatever it might cost her. She took nothing with her but a little ring which her father and mother had given her, a loaf of bread in case she should be hungry, a little pitcher of water in case she should be thirsty, and a little stool to rest upon when she should be weary. Thus she went on and journeyed till she came to the world's end. Then she came to the sun, but the sun looked much too hot and fiery. So she ran away quickly to the moon, but the moon was cold and chilly, and said, "I smell flesh and blood this way." So she took herself away in a hurry and came to the stars. And the stars were friendly and kind to her, and each star sat upon its own little stool. But the morning star rose up and gave her a little piece of wood, and said, "If you have not this little piece of wood, you cannot unlock the castle that stands on the glass mountain, and there your brothers live." The little girl took the piece of wood, rolled it up in a little cloth, and went on again until she came to the glass mountain, and found the door shut. Then she felt for the little piece of wood, but when she unwrapped the cloth it was not there, and she saw she had lost the gift of the good stars. What was to be done? She wanted to save her brothers, and had no key of the castle of the glass mountain. So this faithful little sister took a knife out of her pocket, and cut off her little finger, that was just the size of the piece of wood she had lost, and put it in the door and opened it. As she went in, a little dwarf came up to her and said, "What are you seeking for?" "I seek for my brothers, the 7 ravens," answered she. Then the dwarf said, "My masters are not at home, but if you will wait till they come, pray step in." Now the little dwarf was getting their dinner ready, and he brought their food up on 7 little plates, and their drink in 7 little glasses, and set them upon the table. And out of each little plate their sister ate a small piece, and out of each little glass she drank a small drop. But she let the ring that she had brought with her fall into the last glass. On a sudden she heard a fluttering and croaking in the air, And the dwarf said, "Here come my masters." When they came in, they wanted to eat and drink, and looked for their little plates and glasses. Then said one after the other, "Who has eaten from my little plate? And who has been drinking out of my little glass? Caw, caw, well I ween, mortal lips have this way been." When the seventh came to the bottom of his glass, and found there the ring, he looked at it, and knew that it was his father's and mother's, and said, "Oh, that our little sister would but come! Then we should be free." When the little girl heard this, for she stood behind the door all the time and listened, she ran forward, and in an instant all the ravens took their right form again, and all hugged and kissed each other, and went merrily home. This is the end of The Seven Ravens by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, read by AnonJr.
Snowdrop, a story from Grimm's Fairy Tales by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Snowdrop. It was the middle of winter, when the broad flakes of snow were falling around, that the queen of a country many thousand miles off sat working at her window. The frame of the window was made of fine black ebony, and as she sat looking out upon the snow, she pricked her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon it. Then she gazed thoughtfully upon the red drops that sprinkled the white snow, and said, "Would that my little daughter may be as white as that snow, as red as that blood, and as black as this ebony window frame." And so the little girl really did grow up. Her skin was as white as snow, her cheeks as rosy as blood, and her hair as black as ebony, and she was called Snowdrop. But this queen died, and the king soon married another wife who became queen, and was very beautiful, but so vain that she could not bear to think that anyone could be handsomer than she was. She had a fairy looking-glass, to which she used to go, and then she would gaze upon herself in it and say, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest, tell me, who?" And the glass had always answered, "Thou, queen, art the fairest in all the land." But Snowdrop grew more and more beautiful, and when she was 7 years old, she was as bright as the day, and fairer than the queen herself. Then the glass one day answered the queen, when she went to look in it as usual, "Thou, queen, art fair, and beauteous to see, but Snowdrop is lovelier far than thee." When she heard this, she turned pale with rage and envy, and called to one of her servants, and said, "Take Snowdrop away into the wide wood, that I may never see her any more." Then the servant led her away, but his heart melted when Snowdrop begged him to spare her life, and he said, "I will not hurt you, thou pretty child." So he left her by herself, and though he thought it most likely that wild beasts would tear her in pieces, he felt as if a great weight were taken off of his heart when he had made up his mind not to kill her, but to leave her to her fate, with the chance of someone finding and saving her. Then poor Snowdrop wandered along through the wood in great fear, and the wild beasts roared about her, but none did her any harm. In the evening she came to a cottage among the hills and went in to rest, for her little feet would carry her no further. Everything was spruce and neat in the cottage. On the table was spread a white cloth, and there were 7 little plates, 7 little loaves, and 7 little glasses with wine in them, and 7 knives and forks laid in order, and by the wall stood 7 little beds. As she was very hungry, she picked a little piece of each loaf, and drank a very little wine out of each glass, and after that she thought she would lie down and rest. So she tried all the little beds, but one was too long, and another was too short, till at last the 7th suited her, and there she laid herself down and went to sleep. By and by in came the masters of the cottage. Now they were 7 little dwarfs, that lived among the mountains, and dug and searched for gold. They lighted up their 7 lamps and saw at once that all was not right. The first said, "Who has been sitting on my stool?" The second, "Who has been eating off my plate?" The third, "Who has been picking at my bread?" The fourth, "Who has been meddling with my spoon?" The fifth, "Who has been handling my fork?" The sixth, "Who has been cutting with my knife?" The seventh, "Who has been drinking my wine?" Then the first looked round and said, "Who has been lying on my bed?" And the rest came running to him, and everyone cried out that someone had been upon his bed. But the 7th saw Snowdrop, and called all his brethren to come and see her. And they cried out with wonder and astonishment, and brought their lamps to look at her, and said, "Good heavens, what a lovely child she is!" And they were very glad to see her, and took care not to wake her. And the 7th dwarf slept an hour with each of the other dwarfs in turn, till the night was gone. In the morning, Snowdrop told them all her story, and they pitied her and said if she would keep all things in order, and cook, and wash, and knit, and spin for them, she might stay where she was, and they would take good care of her. Then they went out all day long to their work, seeking for gold and silver in the mountains. But Snowdrop was left at home, and they warned her and said, "The queen will soon find out where you are, so take care and let no one in." But the queen, now that she thought Snowdrop was dead, believed that she must be the handsomest lady in the land, and she went to her glass and said, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest? Tell me who." And the glass answered, "Thou, queen, art the fairest in all this land, but over the hills in the greenwood shade, where the 7 dwarves their dwelling have made, there Snowdrop is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, O queen, than thee." Then the queen was very much frightened, for she knew that the glass always spoke the truth, and was sure that the servant had betrayed her. And she could not bear to think that anyone lived who was more beautiful than she was. So she dressed herself up as an old peddler, and went her way over the hills to the place where the dwarfs dwelt. Then she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell!" Snowdrop looked out at the window and said, "Good day, good woman. What have you to sell?" "Good wares, fine wares," said she, "laces and bobbins of all colors." "I will let the old lady in. She seems to be a very good sort of body," thought Snowdrop, as she ran down and unbolted the door. "Bless me," said the old woman, "how badly your stays are laced. Let me lace them up with one of my nice new laces." Snowdrop did not dream of any mischief, so she stood before the old woman, but she set to work so nimbly and pulled the lace so tight that Snowdrop's breath was stopped, and she fell down as if she were dead. "There's an end to all thy beauty," said the spiteful queen, and went away home. In the evening the 7 dwarfs came home, and I need not say how grieved they were to see their faithful Snowdrop stretched out upon the ground as if she was quite dead. However, they lifted her up, and when they found what ailed her, they cut the lace, and in a little time she began to breathe, and very soon came to life again. Then they said, "The old woman was the queen herself. Take care another time, and let no one in when we are away." When the queen got home, she went straight to her glass and spoke to it as before, but to her great grief it still said, "Thou, queen, art the fairest in all this land, but over the hills in the greenwood shade, where the 7 dwarfs their dwelling have made, there Snowdrop is hiding her head, and she is lovelier far, O queen, than thee." Then the blood ran cold in her heart with spite and malice to see that Snowdrop still lived. And she dressed herself up again, but in quite another dress from the one she wore before, and took with her a poisoned comb. When she reached the dwarf's cottage, she knocked at the door and cried, "Fine wares to sell!" But Snowdrop said, "I dare not let anyone in." Then the queen said, "Only look at my beautiful combs," and gave her the poisoned one. And it looked so pretty that she took it up and put it into her hair to try it. But the moment it touched her head, the poison was so powerful that she fell down senseless. "There you may lie," said the queen, and went her way. But by good luck the dwarfs came in very early that evening, and when they saw Snowdrop lying on the ground, they thought what had happened, and soon found the poisoned comb. And when they took it away, she got well, and told them all that had passed, and they warned her once more not to open the door to anyone. Meanwhile, the queen went home to her glass and shook with rage when she read the very same answer as before, and she said, "Snowdrop shall die if it cost me my life." So she went by herself into her chamber and got ready a poisoned apple. The outside looked very rosy and tempting, but whoever tasted it was sure to die. Then she dressed herself up as a peasant's wife and traveled over the hills to the dwarf's cottage and knocked at the door. But Snowdrop put her head out of the window and said, "I dare not let anyone in, for the dwarfs have told me not." "Do as you please," said the old woman. "But at any rate, take this pretty apple, I will give it to you." "No," said Snowdrop, "I dare not take it." "You silly girl," answered the other. "What are you afraid of? Do you think it is poisoned? Come, do you eat one part and I will eat the other." Now, the apple was so made up that one side was good, though the other side was poisoned. Then Snowdrop was much tempted to taste, for the apple looked so very nice, and when she saw the old woman eat, she could wait no longer. But she had scarcely put the piece into her mouth when she fell down dead upon the ground. "This time nothing will save thee," said the queen. And she went home to her glass, and at last it said, "Thou, queen, art the fairest of all the fair." And then her wicked heart was glad, and as happy as such a heart could be. When evening came, and the dwarfs had gone home, they found Snowdrop lying on the ground. No breath came from her lips, and they were afraid that she was quite dead. They lifted her up and combed her hair, and washed her face with wine and water, but all was in vain, for the little girl seemed quite dead. So they laid her down upon a bier, and all 7 watched and bewailed her 3 whole days. And then they thought they would bury her, but her cheeks were still rosy, and her face looked just as it did while she was alive. So they said, "We will never bury her in the cold ground." And they made a coffin of glass so that they might still look at her, and wrote upon it in golden letters what her name was, and that she was a king's daughter. And the coffin was set among the hills, and one of the dwarfs always sat by it and watched. And the birds of the air came too, and bemoaned Snowdrop. And first of all came an owl, and then a raven, and at last a dove, and sat by her side. And thus Snowdrop lay for a long, long time, and still only looked as though she was asleep, for she was even now as white as snow, and as red as blood, and as black as ebony. At last a prince came and called at the dwarf's house, and he saw Snowdrop, and read what was written in golden letters. Then he offered the dwarfs money, and prayed and besought them to let him take her away. But they said, "We will not part with her for all the gold in the world." At last, however, they had pity on him, and gave him the coffin. But the moment he lifted it up to carry it home with him, the piece of apple fell from between her lips, and Snowdrop awoke and said, "Where am I?" And the prince said, "Thou art quite safe with me." Then he told her all that had happened and said, "I love you far better than all the world. So come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And Snowdrop consented and went home with the prince, and everything was got ready with great pomp and splendor for their wedding. To the feast was asked, among the rest, Snowdrop's old enemy, the queen. And as she was dressing herself in fine, rich clothes, she looked in the glass and said, "Tell me, glass, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest? Tell me who." And the glass answered, "Thou, lady, art loveliest here, I ween, but lovelier far is the new-made queen." When she heard this, she started with rage, but her envy and curiosity were so great that she could not help setting out to see the bride. And when she got there, and saw that it was no other than Snowdrop, who, as she thought, had been dead a long while, she choked with rage, and fell down and died. But Snowdrop and the prince lived and reigned happily over that land many, many years. And sometimes they went up into the mountains and paid a visit to the little dwarfs, who had been so kind to Snowdrop in her time of need. End of Snowdrop, by Jacob Grimm and Wilhelm Grimm. Read by ccroke.
A Son of Adam by Mr. E. Sidney Hartland. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A man was one day working. It was very hot and he was digging. By and by he stopped to rest and wipe his face, and he was very angry to think that he had to work so hard only because of Adam's sin. So he complained bitterly and said some very hard words about Adam. It happened that his master heard him, and he asked, "Why do you blame Adam? You'd have done just like Adam if you'd have been in his place." "No, I shouldn't," said the man. "I should have known better." "Well, I'll try you," said his master. "Come to me at dinner time." So come dinner time, the man came, and his master took him into a room where a table was a set, with good things of all sorts. And he said, "Now, you can eat as much as ever you like from any of the dishes on the table, but don't touch the covered dish in the middle till I come back." And with that the master went out of the room and left the man there all by himself. So the man sat down and helped himself, and ate some of this dish and some of that, and enjoyed himself finely. But after a while, as his master didn't come back, he began to look at the covered dish and to wonder whatever was in it. And he wondered more and more. And he says to himself, "It must be something very nice. Why shouldn't I just look at it? I won't touch it. There can't be any harm in just peeping." So at last he could hold back no longer, and he lifted up the cover a tiny bit, but he couldn't see anything. Then he lifted it up a bit more, and out popped a mouse. The man tried to catch it, but it ran away and jumped off the table, and he ran after it. It ran first into one corner, and then, just as he thought he'd got it, into another, and under the table, and all about the room. And the man made such a clatter, jumping and banging and running round after the mouse, a-trying to catch it, that at last his master came in. "Ah," he said, "never you blame Adam again, my man." This is the end of A Son of Adam by Mr. E. Sidney Hartland. Read by AnonJr.
The Wolf and the Seven Little Kids by the Brothers Grimm. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There was once upon a time an old goat who had 7 little kids, and loved them with all the love of a mother for her children. One day she wanted to go into the forest and fetch some food, so she called all 7 to her and said, "Dear children, I have to go into the forest. Be on your guard against the wolf. If he comes in, he will devour you, all skin, hair, and everything. The wretch often disguises himself, but you will know him at once by his rough voice and his black feet." The kids said, "Dear mother, we will take good care of ourselves. You may go away without any anxiety." Then the old one bleated and went on her way with an easy mind. It was not long before someone knocked at the house door and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the little kids knew that it was the wolf by the rough voice. "We will not open the door," cried they. "You are not our mother. She has a soft, pleasant voice, but your voice is rough. You are the wolf." Then the wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought himself a great lump of chalk, ate this, and made his voice soft with it. Then he came back, knocked at the door of the house, and called, "Open the door, dear children. Your mother is here and has brought something back with her for each of you." But the wolf had laid his black paws against the window, and the children saw them and cried, "We will not open the door. Our mother has not black feet like you. You are the wolf." Then the wolf ran to a baker and said, "I have hurt my feet. Rub some dough over them for me." And when the baker had rubbed his feet over, he ran to the miller and said, "Strew some white meal over my feet for me." The miller thought to himself, "The wolf wants to deceive someone," and refused. But the wolf said, "If you will not do it, I will devour you." Then the miller was afraid and made his paws white for him. Truly, this is the way of mankind. So now the wretch went for the 3rd time to the house door, knocked at it, and said, "Open the door for me, children. Your dear little mother has come home and has brought every one of you something back from the forest with her." The little kids cried, "First, show us your paws, that we may know if you are our dear little mother." Then he put his paws in through the window, and when the kids saw that they were white, they believed that all he said was true and opened the door. But who should come in but the wolf? They were terrified and wanted to hide themselves. One sprang under the table, the second into the bed, the third into the stove, the fourth into the kitchen, the fifth into the cupboard, the sixth under the washing bowl, and the 7th into the clock case. But the wolf found them all, and used no great ceremony. One after the other he swallowed them down his throat. The youngest, who was in the clock case, was the only one he didn't find. When the wolf had satisfied his appetite, he took himself off, laid himself down under a tree in the green meadow outside, and began to sleep. Soon afterwards the old goat came home again from the forest. Ah, what a sight she saw there! The house door stood wide open, the table, chairs, and benches were thrown down, the washing bowl lay broken to pieces, and the quilts and pillows were pulled off the bed. She sought her children, but they were nowhere to be found. She called them one after another by name, but no one answered. At last, when she came to the youngest, a soft voice cried, "Dear mother, I am in the clock case." She took the kid out, and it told her that the wolf had come and had eaten all the others. Then you may imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length, in her grief, she went out and the youngest kid ran with her. When they came to the meadow, there lay the wolf by the tree and snored so loud that the branches shook. She looked at him on every side and saw that something was moving and struggling in his gorged belly. "Oh, heavens!" she said. "Is it possible that my poor children, whom he has swallowed down for his supper, can be still alive?" Then the kid had to run home and fetch scissors and a needle and thread, and the goat cut open the monster's stomach, and hardly had she made one cut, then one little kid thrust its head out, and when she had cut farther, all 6 sprang out one after another, and were all still alive, and had suffered no injury whatever, for in his greediness the monster had swallowed them down whole. What rejoicing there was! They embraced their dear mother and jumped like a tailor at his wedding. The mother, however, said, "Now go and look for some big stones, and we will fill the wicked beast's stomach with them while he is still asleep." Then the 7 kids dragged the stones thither with all speed, and put as many of them into his stomach as they could get in, and the mother sewed him up again in the greatest haste, so that he was not aware of anything, and never once stirred. When the wolf at length had had his fill of sleep, he got on his legs, and as the stones in his stomach made him very thirsty, he wanted to go to a well to drink, but when he began to walk and to move about, the stones in his stomach knocked against each other and rattled. Then cried he, "What rumbles and tumbles against my poor bones! I thought 'twas 6 kids, but it feels like big stones." And when he got to the well and stooped over the water to drink, the heavy stones made him fall in, and he drowned miserably. When the 7 kids saw that, they came running to the spot and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" and danced for joy round about the well with their mother. End of The Wolf and the 7 Little Kids by the Brothers Grimm, read by Anna Richardson.
Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alexandria Adair. Camarillo, California, April 2026. Oswald, Bastable, and Others by E. Nesbit. An Object of Value and Virtue. This happened a very little time after we left our humble home in Lewisham and went to live at the Blackheath house of our Indian uncle, which was replete with every modern convenience and had a big garden and a great many greenhouses. We had had a lot of jolly Christmas presents, and one of them was Dickie's from Father, and it was a printing press. Not one of the 18-penny kind that never come off, but a real tip-topper that you could have printed a whole newspaper out of if you could have been clever enough to make up all the stuff there is in newspapers. I don't know how people can do it. It's all about different things, but it is all just the same too. But the author is sorry to find he is not telling things from the beginning as he has been taught. The printing press doesn't really come into the story till quite a long way on. So it is no use you're wondering what it was that we did print with the printing press. It was not a newspaper anyway, and it wasn't my young brother's poetry, though he and the girls did do an awful lot of that. It was something much more far-reaching, as you will see if you wait. There wasn't any skating those holidays because it was what they call nice open weather. That means it was simply muggy, and you could play out of doors without grown-ups fussing about your overcoat or bringing you to open shame in the street with knitted comforters, except, of course, the poet Noel, who is young and equal to having bronchitis if he only looks at a pair of wet boots. But the girls were indoors a great deal, trying to make things for a bazaar, which the people our housekeeper's elder sister lives with were having in the country for the benefit of a poor iron church that was in difficulties. And Noel and Hey-Cho were with them, putting sweets in bags for the bazaar's lucky tub. So Dickie and I were out alone together. But we were not angry with the others for their stuffy way of spending a day. 2 is not a good number, though, for any game except 5s, and the man who ordered the vineries and pineries and butler's pantries and things never had the sense to tell the builders to make a 5s court. Some people never think of the simplest things, so we had been playing catch with a 5s ball. It was Dickie's ball, and Oswald said, "I bet you can't hit it over the house." "What you bet?" said Dickie, and Oswald replied, "Anything you like. You couldn't do it anyhow." Dickie said, "Miss Blake says betting is wicked, but I don't believe it is if you don't bet money." Oswald reminded him how in Miss Edgeworth, even that wretched little Rosamond, who is never allowed to do anything she wants to, even lose her own needles, makes a bet with her brother, and none of the grown-ups turn a hair. "But I don't want to bet," he said. "I know you can't do it." "I'll bet you my 5s ball I do," Dickie rejoined. "Done! I'll bet you that 3-penny ball of string and the cobbler's wax you were bothering about yesterday." So Dickie said, "Done," and then he went and got a tennis racket, when I meant with his hands, and the ball soared up to the top of the house and faded away. But when we went round to look for it, we couldn't find it anywhere. So he said it had gone over and he had won, and Oswald thought it had not gone over but stayed on the roof, and he hadn't. And they could not agree about it, though they talked of nothing else till tea time. It was a few days after that the big greenhouse began to leak, and something was said at Brecker about had any of us been throwing stones. But it happened that we had not. Only after Breck Oswald said to Dickie, "What price 5s balls for knocking holes in greenhouses?" "Then you own it went over the house, and I won my bet, hand over," Dickie remarked. But Oswald did not see this, because it wasn't proved it was the 5s ball. It was only his idea. Then it rained for 2 or 3 days, and the greenhouse leaked much more than just a 5s ball, and the grown-ups said that the man who put it up had scamped the job, and they sent for him to put it right. And when he was ready, he came, and men came with ladders and putty and glass and a thing to cut it with a real diamond in it that he let us have to look at. It was fine that day, and Dickie and H.O. and I were out most of the time talking to the men. I think the men who come to do things to houses are so interesting to talk to. They seem to know much more about the things that really matter than gentlemen do. I shall try to be like them when I grow up, and not always talk about politics and the way the army is going to the dogs. The men were very jolly and let us go up the ladder and look at the top of the greenhouse. Not H.O., of course, because he's very young indeed and wears socks. When they had gone to dinner, H.O. went in to see if some pies were done that he had made out of a bit of putty the man gave him. He had put the pies in the oven when the cook wasn't looking. I think something must have been done to him, for he did not return. So Dickie and I were left. Dickie said, "If I could get the ladder round to the roof of the stove house, I believe I should find my 5s ball in the gutter. I know it went over the house that day." So Oswald, ever ready and obliging, helped his brother to move the ladder round to the tiled roof of the stove house, and Dickie looked in the gutter. But even he could not pretend the ball was there, because I am certain it never went over at all. When he came down again, Oswald said, "Sold again," and Dickie said, "Sold yourself. You jolly well thought it was there, and you'd have to pay for it." This unjustness was Oswald's reward for his kind helpingness about moving the ladder. So he turned away, just saying carelessly over his retiring shoulder, "I should think you'd have the decency to put the ladder back where you found it." And he walked off. But he has a generous heart. A crossing sweeper told him so once when he gave him a halfpenny, and when Dickie said, "Come on, Oswald, don't be a sneak," he proved that he was not one, and went back and helped with the ladder. But he was a little distant to Dickie till all disagreeableness was suddenly buried in a rat Pincher had found in the cucumber frame. Then the washing hands and faces for dinner bell rang, and of course we should have gone in directly, only just then the workmen came back from their dinner. We waited, because one of them had promised Oswald some hinges for a ferret's hutch he thought of making, and while he was talking to this man, the other one went up the ladder. And then the most exciting and awful thing I ever saw happened, all in a minute before anyone could have said Jack Robinson, even if they had thought of him. The bottom part of the ladder slipped out along the smooth tiles by the greenhouse, and there was a long, dreamlike, dreadful time when Oswald knew what was going to happen. But it could only have been a second, really, because before anyone could do anything, the top end of the ladder slid softly, like cutting butter off the top of the greenhouse, and the man on the ladder fell too. I never saw anything that made me feel so wrong way up in my inside. He lay there all in a heap, without moving, and the men crowded round him. Dickie and I could not see properly because of the other men, but the foreman, the one who had given Oswald the hinges, said, "Better get a doctor." It always takes a long time for a workman to understand what you want him to do, and long before these had, Oswald had shouted, "I'll go!" and was off like an arrow from a bow, and Dickie with him. They found the doctor at home, and he came that minute. Oswald and Dickie were told to go away, but they could not bear to, though they knew their dinner bell must have been already rung for them many times in vain, and it was now ringing with fury. They just lurked round the corner of the greenhouse, so the doctor said it was a broken arm and nothing else hurt. And when the poor man was sent home in a cab, Oswald and Dickie got the cabman, who was a friend of theirs, to let them come on the box with him. And thus they saw where the man lived, and saw his poor wife greet the sufferer. She only said, "Gracious, Gus, whatever have you been up to now? You always was an unlucky chap." But we could see her loving heart was full to overflowing. When she had taken him in and shut the door, we went away. The wretched sufferer, whose name transpired to be Augustus Victor Plunkett, was lucky enough to live in a mews. Noel made a poem about it afterwards. "O muse of poetry, do not refuse to tell about a man who loves the muse. It is his humble home so poor, and the cabman who drove him home lives next door but two. And when his arm was broke, his loving wife with tears spoke." And so on. It went on for 224 lines, and he could not print it, because it took far too much type for the printing press. It was as we went out of the mews that we first saw the goat. I gave him a piece of coconut ice, and he liked it awfully. He was tied to a ring in the wall, and he was black and white with horns and a beard. And when the man he belonged to saw us looking at him, he said we could have that goat a bargain. And when we asked, out of politeness, and not because we had any money, except 2 pence halfpenny of Dickie's, how much he wanted for the goat, he said, 7 and 6 pence is the lowest, so I won't deceive you, young gents, and so help me if he ain't worth thribble the money." Oswald did the sum on his head, which told him the goat was worth £1, 2 shillings, and 6 pence, and he went away sadly, for he did want that goat. We were later for dinner than I ever remember our being, and Miss Blake had not kept us any pudding, but Oswald bore up when he thought of the goat. But Dickie seemed to have no beautiful inside thoughts to sustain him, and he was so dull, Dora said she only hoped he wasn't going to have measles. It was when we had gone to bed that he fiddled about with the studs and old buttons and things in a velvety box he had, till Oswald was in bed, and then he said, "Look here, Oswald, I feel as if I was a murderer, or next door to. It was our moving that ladder, I'm certain it was, and now he's laid up, and his wife and children." Oswald sat up in bed and said kindly, "You're right, old chap. It was your moving that ladder. Of course, you didn't put it back firm. But the man's not killed." "We oughtn't to have touched it," he said. "Or we ought to have told them we had or something. Suppose his arm gets blood poisoning or inflammation or something awful. I couldn't go on living if I was a doer of a deed like that." Oswald had never seen Dickie so upset. He takes things jolly easy as a rule. Oswald said, "Well, it is no use fuming over it. You'd better get out of your clothes and go to bed. We'll cut down in the morning, leave our cards and kind inquiries." Oswald only meant to be kind, and by making this amusing remark, he wished to draw his erring brother's thoughts from the remorse that was poisoning his young life, and would very likely keep him awake for an hour or more thinking of it, and fidgeting about so that Oswald couldn't sleep. But Dickie did not take it at all the way Oswald meant. He said, "Shut up, Oswald, you beast," and lay down on his bed and began to blub. Oswald said, "Beast yourself, because it is the proper thing to say," but he was not angry, only sorry that Dickie was so duffing as to not see what he meant, and he got out of bed and went softly to the girls' room, which is next ours, and said, "I say, come into our room a sec, will you? Dickie is howling fit to bring the house down. I think a council of us elder ones would do him more good than anything." "Whatever is up?" Dora asked, getting into her dressing gown. "Oh, nothing, except that he's a murderer. Come on, and don't make a row. Mind the mats and our boots by the door." They came in, and Oswald said, "Look here, Dickie, old boy, here are the girls, and we're going to have a council about it." They wanted to kiss him, but he wouldn't, and shrugged his shoulders about and wouldn't speak. But when Alice got hold of his hand, he said in a muffled voice, "You tell them, Oswald." When Oswald and Dickie were alone, you will have noticed the just elder brother blamed the proper person, which was Dickie, because he would go up on the stovehouse roofs after his beastly ball, which Oswald did not care a rap about. And besides, he knew it wasn't there. But now that other people were there, Oswald, of course, said, "You see, we moved the men's ladder while they were at their dinner. And you know the man that fell off the ladder, and we went with him in the cab to the place where that goat was? Well, Dickie has only just thought of it, but of course it was really our fault, his tumbling, because we couldn't have put the ladder back safely. And Dickie thinks if his arm blood poisoned itself, we should be as good as murderers. Dickie is perfectly straight. He sat up and sniffed and blew his nose and said, "It was my idea moving the ladder. Oswald only helped."
"Can't we ask Uncle to see that dear sufferer wants for nothing while he's ill and all that?"
said Dora. "Well," said Oswald, "we could, of course. But then it would all come out. And about the Fives ball, too. And we can't be at all sure it was the ball made the greenhouse leak, because I know it never went over the house." "Yes, it did," said Dickie, giving his nose a last stern blow. Oswald was generous to a sorrowing foe and took no notice, only went on, "And about the ladder, we can't be quite sure it wouldn't have slipped on those tiles even if we'd never moved it. But I think Dickie would feel jollier if we could do something for the man, and I know it would me." That looks mixed, but Oswald was rather agitated himself, and that was what he said.
"We must think of something to do to get money," Alice said, "like we used to do when we were treasure seekers."
Presently the girls went away. We heard them drawing in their room. Just as Oswald was falling asleep, the door opened, and a figure in white came in and bent above his almost sleeping form. It said,
"We've thought of something. We'll have a bazaar, like the people Miss Blake's elder sister lives with, did for the poor iron church."
The form glided away. Miss Blake is our housekeeper. Oswald could hear that Dickie was already sleeping, so he turned over and went to sleep himself. He dreamed of goats, only they were as big as railway engines and would keep ringing the church bells till Oswald awoke, and it was the getting up bell, and not a great goat ringing it, but only Sarah as usual. The idea of the bazaar seemed to please all of us.
"We can ask all the people we know to it," said Alice. "And wear our best frocks and sell the things at the stalls," said Dora.
Dickie said we could have it in the big greenhouse now the plants were out of it. "I will write a poem for the man and say it at the bazaar," Noel said. "I know people say poetry at bazaars. The one Aunt Carrie took me to, a man said a piece about a cowboy." Cho said there ought to be lots of sweets, and then everyone would buy them. Oswald said someone would have to ask my father, and he said he would do it if the others liked. He did this because of an inside feeling in his mind that he knew might come on at any moment. So he did, and yes was the answer. And then the uncle gave Oswald a whole quid to buy things to sell at the bazaar, and my father gave him 10 bob for the same useful and generous purpose, and said he was glad to see we were trying to do good to others. When he said that the inside feeling in Oswald's mind began, that he had felt afraid would, sometime, and he told my father about him and Dickie moving the ladder, and about the hateful Fives ball and everything. And my father was awfully decent about it, so that Oswald was glad he had told. The girls wrote the invitations to all our friends that very day. We boys went down to look in the shops and see what we could buy for the bazaar. And we went to ask how Mr. Augustus Victor Plunkett's arm was getting on, and to see the goat. The others liked the goat almost as much as Oswald, and even Dickie agreed that it was our clear duty to buy the goat for the sake of poor Mr. Plunkett. Because, as Oswald said, if it was worth £1 2 and 6, we could easily sell it again for that, and we should have gained 15 shillings for the sufferer. So we bought the goat and changed his 10 shillings to do it. The man untied the other end of the goat's rope, and Oswald took hold of it, and said he hoped we were not robbing the man by taking his goat from him for such a low price. And he said, "Not at all, young gents, don't you mention it, please to oblige a friend any day of the week." So we started to take the goat home, but after about half a street he would not come any more. He stopped still, and a lot of boys and people came round, just as if they had never seen a goat before. We were beginning to feel quite uncomfortable when Oswald remembered the goat liked coconut ice, so Noel went into a shop and got 3 pen'orth, and then the cheap animal consented to follow us home. So did the street boys. The coconut ice was more for the money than usual, but not so nice. My father was not pleased when he saw the goat, but when Alice told him it was for the bazaar, he laughed and let us keep it in the stable yard. It got out early that morning and came right into the house and butted the cook in her own back kitchen, a thing even Oswald himself would have hesitated before doing, so that it showed it was a brave goat. The groom did not like the goat because it bit a hole in a sack of corn, and then walked up it like a mountain, and all the oats ran out and got between the stones of the stable yard, and there was a row. But we explained it was not for long, as the bazaar was in 3 days, and we hurried to get things ready. We were each to have a stall. Dora took the refreshment stall. The uncle made Miss Blake get all that ready. Alice had a stall for pincushions and brush and comb bags, and other useless things that girls make with stuff and ribbons. Noel had a poetry stall, where you could pay 2 pence and get a piece of poetry and a sweet wrapped up in it. We chose sugar almonds, because they're not so sticky. H.O.'s stall was to be sweets, if he promised on his word of honor as a Bastable, only to eat one of each kind. Dickie wished to have a stall for mechanical toys and parts of clocks. He has a great many parts of clocks, but the only mechanical toy was his clockwork engine that was broken ages ago, so he had to give it up, and he couldn't think of anything else. So he settled to help Oswald and keep an eye on H.O. Oswald's stall was meant to be a stall for really useful things, but in the end it was just a lumber stall for things other people did not want. But he did not mind, because the others agreed he should have the entire selling of the goat, and he racked his young brain to think how to sell it in the most interesting and unusual way. And at last he saw how, and he said, "He shall be a lottery, and will make people take tickets, and then draw a secret number out of a hat, and whoever gets the right number gets the goat. I wish it was me." "We ought to advertise it, though," Dickie said. "Have handbills printed, and send out sandwich men." Oswald imprinted the printers at Greenwich, and handbills were an awful price, and sandwich men a luxury far beyond our means. So we went home sadly, and then Alice thought of the printing press. We got it out and cleaned it where the ink had been upset into it and mended the broken parts as well as we could and got some more printer's ink and wrote the circular and printed it. It was Sacred Lottery, exceptionable and rare chance, an object of value. "It ought to be an object of virtue," said Dickie. "I saw it in the old iron and china picture shop. It was a carved ivory ship and there's a ticket on it. Rare object of virtue."
The goat's an object, certainly, Alice said, and it's valuable. As for virtue, I'm not so sure.
But Oswald thought the 2 V's looked well, and being virtuous is different to being valuable, but all the same the goat might be both when you got to know him really well. So he put it in. Sacred Lottery, an exceptional and rare chance, an object of value and virtue. Will be lotteried for on Saturday next at 4 o'clock. Tickets 1 or 2 shillings each according to how many people want them. The object is not disclosed till after the lottery, but it costs a lot of money and is honestly worth 3 times as much. If you win it, it is the same as winning money. Apply at Modern House, Blackheath, at 3 o'clock next Saturday. Take tickets early to prevent disappointment. We printed these, and though they looked a bit rum, we had not time to do them again, so we went out about dusk and dropped them in people's letterboxes. The next day, Oswald, who was always very keen on doing the thing well, got out 2 baking boards out of the kitchen and bored holes in them with an auger I had, and pasted paper on them, and did on them with a paintbrush and ink the following lines: Secret Lottery, object of value and virtue. Tickets 1 shilling and 2 shillings. If you win, it will be the same as winning money. Lottery at Morden House, Blackheath, Saturday at 4. Come at 3. And he slung the boards round his neck and tied up his mouth with one of those knitted comforters he despises so much at other times, and pulling a cap of father's over his bold ears, he got Dickie to let him out of the side door. And then the brave boy went right across the heath and 3 times up and down the village, till those boys that followed him in the goat home went for him near the corner of Wemmy's Road, and he made a fight for it, taking off the boards and using them as shields. But at last, being far outnumbered, which is no disgrace, he had to chuck the boards and run for it. Saturday was fine. We had hung the greenhouse with evergreens and paper roses that looked almost like real among the green, and Miss Blake let us have some Chinesey-looking curtains to cover over the shelves and staging with. And the gardener let us have a lot of azuleas and things in pots, so that it was all very bowery and flowery. Alice's stall was the smartest looking, because Miss Blake had let her have all the ribbons and things that were over from the other bazaar. The poetry stall had more flowers on it than any of the others, to make up for the poetry looking so dull outside. Of course, you could not see the sweet inside the packets till you opened them. Red azuleas are prettier than poetry, I think. I think the tropic lands in Westward Ho had great trees with flowers like that. We got the goat into the stovehouse. He was to be kept a secret till the very last, and by 2:30 we were all ready and very clean and dressed. We had all looked out everything we had thought anyone could want to buy and that we could spare, and some things that we could not, and most of these were on Oswald's table, among others, several boxes of games that we had never cared about, some bags of marbles, which nobody plays now, a lot of old books, a pair of braces with woolwork on them, that Annette had once made for Oswald, and of course he couldn't wear them, some bags of odd buttons for people that like sewing these things on, a lot of foreign stamps, gardening tools, Dickie's engine that won't go, and a stuffed parrot, but he was moth-eaten. About 3 our friends began to come. Mrs. Leslie and Lord Tottenham and Albert's uncle and a lot of others. It was a very grand party, and they admired the bazaar very much and all bought things. Mrs. Leslie bought the engine for 10 shillings, though we told her honestly it would never go again, and Albert's uncle bought the parrot and would not tell us what he wanted it for. The money was put on a blue dish so that everyone could see how it got on, and our hearts were full of joy as we saw how much silver there was among the pennies and 2 or 3 gold pieces too. I know now how the man feels who holds the plate at the door in church. Noel's poetry stall was much more paying than I ever thought it would be. I believe nobody really likes poetry, and yet everyone pretends they do, either so as to not hurt Noel's feelings, or because they think well-brought-up people ought to like poetry. Even Noel's. Of course, Macaulay and Kipling are different. I don't mind them so much myself. Noel wrote a lot of new poetry for the bazaar. It took up all his time, and even then he had not enough new stuff to wrap all the sugar almonds in, so he made up with old poetry that he'd done before. Albert's uncle got one of the new ones and said it made him a proud man. It was, "How noble and good and kind you are, to come to Victor A. Plunkett's bazaar. Please buy as much as you can bear, for the sufferer needs all you can possibly spare. I know you are sure to take his part, because you have such a noble heart." Mrs. Leslie got, "The rose is red, the violet's blue, the lily's pale, and so are you, or would be if you had seen him fall off the top of a ladder so tall. Do buy as much as you can stand, and lend the poor a helping hand." Lord Tottenham, though, only got one of the old ones, and it happened to be Wreck of the Malabar. He was an admiral once. He liked it. He is a nice old gentleman, but people do say he's eccentric. Father got a poem that said, "Please turn your eyes round in their sockets and put both your hands in your pockets. Your eyes will show you things so gay, and I hope you'll find enough in your pockets to pay for the good things you buy. Goodbye." And he laughed and seemed pleased. But when Mrs. Morrison, Albert's mother, got that poem about the black beetle that was poisoned, she was not so pleased, and she said it was horrid, and made her flesh creep. You know the poem. It says, "Oh, beetle, how I weep to see thee lying on thy poor back. It is so very sad to see, you were so leggy and black. I wish you were crawling about alive again, but many people think this is nonsense and a shame." Noel would recite, no matter what we said, and he stood up on a chair, and everyone in their blind generousness paid 6 pence to hear him. It was a long poem of his own about the Duke of Wellington, and it began, "Hail, faithful leader of the brave band, who went to make Napoleon understand he couldn't have everything his own way. We taught him this on Waterloo Day." I heard that much. But then he got so upset and frightened, no one could hear anything till the end, when it said, "So praise the heroes of Waterloo, and let us do our duty like they had to do." Everyone clapped very much, but Noel was so upset he nearly cried, and Mrs. Leslie said, "Noel, I'm feeling pale as a lily again. Take me round the garden to recover myself." She was red as usual, but it saved Noel from making an ass of himself, and we got 17 shillings and 6 pence by his reciting. So that was all right. We might as well not have sent out those circulars, because only the people we had written to ourselves came. Of course, I don't count those 5 street boys, the same Oswald had the sandwich board fight with. They came and they walked round and looked at the things, but they had no money to spend, it turned out, and only came to be disagreeable and make fun. So Albert's uncle asked them if they did not think their families would be lonely without them, and he and I saw them off at the gate. Then they stood outside and made rude noises. And another stranger came, and Oswald thought perhaps the circular was beginning to bear fruit, but the stranger asked for the master of the house, and he was shown in. Oswald was just shaking up the numbers in his hat for the Lottery of the Goat, and Alice and Dora were selling the tickets for half a crown each to our visitors, and explaining the dreadful misery of the poor man that all this trouble was being taken for, and we were all enjoying ourselves very much, when Sarah came to say Master Oswald was to go into Master's study at once. So we went, wondering what on earth he could have been up to now. But he could not think of anything in particular. But when his father said, "Oswald, this gentleman is a detective from Scotland Yard," he was glad he had told about the 5's ball and the ladder, because he knew his father would now stand by him. But he did wonder whether you could be sent to prison for leaving a ladder in a slippery place, and how long they would keep you there for that crime. Then my father held out one of the fatal circulars and said, "I suppose this is some of your work? Mr. Biggs here is bound in honor to do his best to find out when people break the laws of the land. Now lotteries are illegal and can be punished by law." Oswald gloomily wondered how much the law he could do to you. He said, "We didn't know, father." Then his father said, "The best thing you can do is tell this gentleman all about it." So Oswald said, Augustus Victor Plunkett fell off a ladder and broke his arm, and perhaps it was our fault for meddling with the ladder at all, so we wanted to do something to help him, and Father said we might have a bazaar. It is happening now, and we had £3 2 and 7 last time I counted the bazaar. But what about the lottery? Said Mr. Biggs, who did not look as if he would take Oswald to prison just then, as our young hero had feared. In fact, he looked rather jolly. Is the prize money? No, oh no, only it's so valuable it's as good as winning money. Then it's only a raffle, said Mr. Biggs. That's what it is, just a plain raffle. What is the prize? Are we to be allowed to go on with it? Asked the wary Oswald. Why, yes, said Mr. Biggs. If it's not money, why not? What is the valuable object? Come, Oswald, said his father, when Oswald said nothing. What is the object of virtue? I'd rather not say, said Oswald, feeling very uncomfortable. Mr. Biggs said something about duty being duty, and my father said, Come, Oswald, don't be a young duffer. I dare say it's nothing to be ashamed of. I should think not, indeed, said Oswald, as his fond thoughts played with that beautiful goat. Well, then? Well, sir, Oswald spoke desperately, for he wondered his father had been patient so long, and saw that he wasn't going to go on being... You see, the great thing is, nobody's to know it's a secret. No one's to know what the prize is. Only when you've won it, it will be revealed. Well, said my father, if Mr. Biggs will take a glass of wine with me, we'll follow you down to the greenhouse, and he can see for himself. Mr. Biggs said something about thanking Father kindly and about his duty, and presently they came down to the greenhouse. Father did not introduce Mr. Biggs to anyone. I suppose he forgot. But Oswald did, while Father was talking to Mrs. Leslie, and Mr. Biggs made himself very agreeable to all the ladies. Then we had the lottery. Everyone had tickets, and Alice asked Mr. Biggs to buy one. She let him have it for £1 because it was the last, and we all hoped he would win the goat. He seemed quite sure now that Oswald was not kidding, and that the prize was not money. Indeed, Oswald went so far as to tell him privately the prize was too big to put in your pocket, and that if it was divided up it would be spoiled, which is true of goats, but not of money. Everyone was laughing and talking, and wondering anxiously whatever the prize could possibly be. Oswald carried round the hat, and everyone drew a number. The winning number was 666, and Albert's uncle said afterwards it was a curious coincidence. I don't know what it meant, but it made Mrs. Leslie laugh. When everyone had drawn a number, Oswald rang the dinner bell to command silence, and there was a hush full of anxious expectation. Then Oswald said, The prize number is 666. Who has it? And Mr. Biggs took a step forward and held out his paper. The prize is yours. I congratulate you, said Oswald warmly. Then he went into the stove-house, and hastily placing a wreath of paper roses on the goat's head that Alice had got ready for the purpose, he got out the goat by secretly showing it a bit of coconut ice, and led it by the same means to the feet of the happy winner. Here is your prize, said Oswald, with feelings of generous pride. I am very glad you've got him. He'll be a comfort to you, and make up for all the trouble you've had over our lottery, raffle, I mean. And he placed the ungoated end of the rope in the unresisting hand of the fortunate detective. Neither Oswald nor any of the rest of us have ever been able to make out why everyone should have laughed so. But they did. They said the lottery was the success of the afternoon, and the ladies kept on congratulating Mr. Biggs. At last all the people began to go, and the detective, so unexpectedly made rich beyond his wildest dreams, said he too must be going. He had tied the goat to the greenhouse door, and now he moved away. But we all cried out, You've forgotten your goat! No, I haven't, he said very earnestly. I shall never forget that goat to my dying hour. But I wanted to call on my aunt just close by, and I couldn't very well take the goat to see her. I don't see why not, H.O. said. It's a very nice goat. She's frightened of them, said he. One ran at her when she was a little girl. But if you will allow me, sir, and he winked at my father, which is not manners, if you'll allow me, I'll call in for the goat on my way to the station. We got £5, 13 and 5 by the bazaar and the raffle. We should have had another 10 shillings from father, but he had to give it to Mr. Biggs, because we had put him to the trouble of coming all the way from Scotland Yard, because he thought our circular was from some hardened criminal wishing to cheat his trustful fellow creatures. We took the money to Augustus Victor Plunkett next morning, and I tell you he was pleased. We waited till long after dark for the detective to return for his rich prize, but he never came. I hope he was not set upon and stabbed in some dark alley. If he is alive and not imprisoned, I can't see why he didn't come back. I often think anxiously of him. Because, of course, detectives have many enemies among felons, who think nothing of stabbing people in the back, so that being murdered in a dark alley is a thing all detectives are constantly liable to. End of An Object of Value and Virtue.